Okay, I'll call the October 11th meeting of the El Dorado Irrigation District Board of Directors to order. Is it 12th? Thank you, October 12th. Meeting of the Board of Directors to order. Let's do a roll call.
Directors Osborne, Dwyer, and Anzini, present. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, Clerk to the Board Sullivan, present. Directors Veer, Camp, and Day are absent.
Thank you. Please stand, remove your cover, and join me in the pledge. That means hat.
I know.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
For the
There it is.
for the record,
October, everybody.
for the record, Director Day arrived at 9:01 a.m.
Okay, great. Think you all have had a chance to review the agenda. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Osborne and Anzini. Any public comment about the agenda?
If members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. At this time, there does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
Okay, let's call for the vote.
Director Day.
Yeah. We're,
We have no online today?
no.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. General Manager's employee recognition. Jim?
Good morning. Just one. We received an email from Sean Duffy, an El Dorado County resident, expressing appreciation to the district and our staffs for our work during the Caldor fire emergency. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
May I, Mr. President? There was also an email from the Petersons regarding super fast, excellent service. There was a sewage line break, or not break, but a sewage clog just outside their house in the street, and EID got on it very quickly and got it cleared up.
Yes, you're correct. We're going to put that on the next one, but it was very much appreciated from those customers. We did have a nice response for them.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Alan. We'll now entertain public comment for items not on today's agenda.
President Dwyer, it does not appear there are any members wishing to speak during our public comment period.
Thank you very much. Okay, again, communications, General Manager's report.
None today.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you have anything to report today?
None today, thank you.
Okay, how about fellow members of the board? Do you have any reports on activities since our last meeting?
Well, last night, during the game, no, I'm just kidding.
I know. Yes, Director Osborne.
I've had numerous inquiries as to the low status of the Four Bay Reservoir, and I'm explaining to people that how many years we've had discussions about the flume filling that's the third of our water supply, that we're rapidly working on fire damage to get it replaced, hopefully by the 1st of January, to be able to resupply the system. In addition to that, I got a nice message from Charity Hicks, excuse me, Charity Hicks, about a crew that was there had a line break, and that she was really appreciative of how fast they fixed it, and more importantly, how they cleaned it up. She said it was just, I mean, it was just done classy. So I'd like to recognize Seth Borba, Adam Stewart, Matt Frazier, Jared Zender, Joe Breckenridge, Gene Hayden, and Don Holland for a job well done, and represented the district in fine fashion. That's it.
Thank you, Director Osborne. I like the term classy. It was done with class. Did you have something else, Director Anzini?
No, professionalism is what it is.
Classy. Okay, good. Next, we'll move on to the consent calendar. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Thank you, Director Anzini, Director Day. Is there any board comment on the consent calendar? Nope. Okay, any public comment on the consent calendar?
President Dwyer, at this time, it does not appear there are any members of the public
Okay, thank
wishing
you.
to speak.
Then please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to information item number 6. Mr. Corcoran.
All right, President Dwyer, members of the board, good morning. Happy Tuesday.
I have to say, you look a little more relaxed and rested today than you did the last time.
And if you look at Brian, he probably looks a little more exhausted, so he's.
Actually, I like it when he's stressed. I like it when he's stressed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's been a lot of work, and we're going to talk about several agenda items today, and the engineering team has definitely, it's been a lot of hours since we last were with you. Today we have an information item for you to just talk about, introduce the subject of vegetation management along our transmission right-of-ways. And you've seen some pictures of this, but we've taken, it actually started last December, honestly, with the break of the EDM1, EDM2, and troubles accessing some of those facilities, and really taking a holistic look at our transmission right-of-ways across the system. As the board's well aware, and for members of the public, serving 220 square miles is a lot of miles of transmission mains. So we're going to talk about those, talk about some of the age of those infrastructure, and specifically maintaining access to them for necessary repairs and maintenance. Next slide, please. So just a brief overview. We have about 120 miles of transmission lines ranging from about 16 inches up to 6 feet in diameter. They deliver raw water, we call source water, and treated water to the treatment plants, and then treated water from there on out across the district service area. The majority of those, because our beautiful county, are located outside the roads, some are in very steep and wooded areas. And a significant portion of those, honestly, are just really overgrown with vegetation, which does complicate and challenge inspection, honestly, sometimes even locating some of these facilities, and clearly complicates repairs, and most especially emergency repairs. Next slide, please. So I kind of liken this slide to sort of an angiogram, where you have your heart on the right and the arteries radiating out to the left. And so Our two east side treatment plants, Reservoir A, Slide Park Water Treatment Plant, and Reservoir 1, 4-Bay Water Treatment Plant, are two raw water sources where our water is treated and then sent west. And this is looking at our transmission lines from about the eastern boundary of our service area just to about Bass Lake Road. You can see Bass Lake tanks 1 and 2 on the left. We're going to go through each one of these transmission lines, but as you can see, we cover quite a bit of terrain and quite a bit of elevation and various different terrain types. Next slide, please. So I'm first just going to introduce to you how we did this, and then we'll go through each one of those. And I really want to acknowledge Jan Wolf, our GIS specialist, and Rudenko spent a lot of hours. I get to just sit here and give you the summary results, and they did all the hard work. So what we did was we looked at 30 feet width, so 15 feet on each side of these main transmission lines, and actually using aerial photography and GIS analysis, we were able to look at the status of vegetation over each of these. 30 foot is a general surrogate to the right-of-way, obviously over 120 miles, various different types of rights-of-way. A lot of these lines were constructed by the Bureau of Reclamation, so the nature of them is a little bit different than our traditional right-of-ways these days. But this just gives us a good snapshot picture. So in this particular exercise, or this snap, oh yes.
Can you explain that a little more, the Bureau of Reclamation right-of-ways versus our negotiated, signed, recorded?
Sure, I'll do the introductory subject and let our general counsel give you the detailed answers. So, I always look the opportunity to phone a friend on this, right? Right. So, you know, the nature when a lot of these facilities were first constructed, honestly, some of them even cross Forest Service land, and so the nature of those rights of way by federal, in a sense, a federal prescriptive easement. Am I doing it correctly? I'm getting some nods. Are just different than a clearly delineated bearing and a distance from a certain facility in this case. And I'll let Brian fill in all the rest of the technical details.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add there. I mean, Dan's correct. There are, and President Dwyer, you are alluding to this, there are instances in which the district acquired, whether through negotiation or other means, a recorded easement to own and maintain our facilities within private property. There are other areas in which the district has no recorded easement to those areas, but which the district maintains a utility easement by way of prescription, meaning we've maintained it for the statutory period of time in order to acquire a property right. The transmissions and many of our lines, it varies, the extent to which the district has recorded easement rights versus not. And many of the older lines, and including the ones originally constructed by the Bureau of Reclamation, didn't obtain recorded rights to the access when they were constructed. That's not to say we don't have the rights. As I said, some rights we maintain by way of prescription, but it is a little bit of a hodgepodge depending upon the line and where it's located. And we try and acquire recorded rights when we can, even to existing facilities, but there's still a lot out there.
Would it behoove us to attempt to get recorded easements on all these segments so that we can preclude any issues in the future?
I think maybe I'll just talk from an operational standpoint and let Brian, as Brian just described, when we do have a project to go in, such as the EDM 1-2 intertie, that was an opportunity to do that. Doing it holistically, how many parcels on the front end would be a very labor-intensive exercise, but in terms of when we need to go in, it's usually in both parties' best interest to have that more clearly defined right away, and I'm not sure if Brian, there's anything else I'd like to add to that.
That's exactly right. And anytime we have an opportunity, because either we're working on the line to go in and try and negotiate an access, and as Dan said, most of the time, the parties with which we're negotiating agree that it's in their interest to have recorded easements as well. So we try and do that, as a matter of course, anytime we have the opportunity, and OGC works closely with the engineering staff and operations to try and make that happen.
But this project would be exactly that opportunity, wouldn't it?
This may be an opportunity, and when we dive into some of the details, that's a great question. If we are going in there, how we get to the property, how we maintain it, just because we want to be good neighbors, so.
And- I'm sorry, Director Day.
I was just going to ask, is there a risk of opening Pandora's box of if we try to do it proactively, which is a good idea, but then, you do this whole line. I know we're diverging off topic, but one homeowner says, no, I don't want you to come in and thin things out, even though it might be good for them, but does that create then potentially sticky issues down the road versus, or just saying, no, we have the right, we don't need to negotiate something?
I'm reluctant to say no because you never know what you're going to find when you go out there. But I don't believe we've run into hard stops. And when we have, we've been able to figure out a solution. In my experience, and with fire being what it is, I mean, Dan can speak to it. I think that we will continue our approach to establish and record rights of way as the opportunities arise, and if and when we run into problems, I think we'll be able to figure it out.
Won't we need to have right of entry on all these properties?
That would be one, the right of entry form similar to what the Fire Safe Council and other entity resource conservation district would likely be one mechanism. to
Would
help
we
us
not have
streamline.
prescriptive right? I mean, some of these lines have been in there since the 50s. And wouldn't we have prescriptive right?
That's the problem.
Yeah, as I said, we for the transmission lines in which we do not have recorded easement rights, we very likely have prescriptive rights, and we maintain that position on over all of our facilities, given the length of time with which we've been operating them and so forth. So the answer to your question, George, is yes, most likely, and that's why we've been able to work out access as we need to.
All of your questions are exactly on point with what General Manager Abercrombie is asking us about customer outreach, public outreach interaction. We're in people's backyards. We want to be good neighbors. We want to make sure that we're meeting their interest for aesthetics while also protecting our facilities. These are all great questions. These are all ones that we've been working through as exactly how to best handle in the months ahead. So,
Good, thank you.
yeah, no problem. So I've used my lifeline, but I'm ready to answer any hard questions myself. So. Okay, next slide, please. So the next slide just shows the results of some of that GIS analysis. And each of these little polygons are summed up by transmission main, and we'll give you some of the acreages. And this is just the best way to give us approximate scope of work. As I said, it's going to vary parcel by parcel, but this gives us a good snapshot. So next slide, please. So we'll talk about the Camino Conduit, which delivers both raw water or source water to the Reservoir A water treatment plant, and then all the way down into Res 2A, 2B down at Snows Road. So on the bottom right, the raw water leaves dam number 2, the most eastern dam, flows under the spillway and back in across Slide Park Road into the treatment plant, where that water is subsequently treated, delivered across actually 3 different drainages, across Starks Grade, across Weber Creek, and then ends up there at Snows Road at our tanks, which you're going to hear about later today, Res 2A and 2B. So, and that's approximately Snows Road. So on the bottom right, have our approximate acreage, so about 53 acres if you took a 30-foot wide easement. And then from our GIS analysis, it looks about 32, 33 of those acres. When you drive up Highway 50 and look to the right, you can see why, right? So very heavy coniferous forest there. Next slide, please. And this just gives a few of the volunteer ponderosa pines that have elected to establish themselves over our pipeline. And we obviously don't want any of these roots obviously to impact any of the lines. And then if we need to get in there and maintain them, each of these little facilities here, appurtenances, we call them above ground air relief valves, and we'll go into that a little more detail in a second. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next one is the Pleasant Oak main. And so from Reservoir A, we took water across over to Reservoir 2A and 2B to bring water down the north side of Highway 50. And this is how we bring treated water down the south side of Highway 50. So again, Reservoir A water treatment plant, and then our covered reservoirs kind of roughly following Stark's Grade, and then eventually into Pleasant Valley Road, down where just downstream of Slide Park Road confluence there, E16. And then Res B, Res C, and then this transmission line ends at Tank 7, which is our in-conduit hydroelectric facility. Okay, so we have about 77 acres, and about half of that is vegetated again. So we start to get into that transition oak woodland from the coniferous forest here. Okay, next slide, please. So you can see here, obviously, we're starting to see mixed habitats, some chaparral, manzanita. We end up resorting to put some cones to be able to kind of peek through the poison oak and manzanita to see some of these facilities. As you can see, they're not that easy to get to, even to maintain or inspect the ARVs, much less conduct maintenance on the line itself. You can see on the bottom right, kind of covered in some leaf litters, another ARV bulk cover there. Okay, next slide, please. And then the DSM, or Diamond Springs, Maine, taking water from that same tank 7A, 7B, all the way down into Cameron Park at Reservoir 12. And so that's there just above the Marshall Medical Facilities. We just had a maintenance project actually there probably about 2 weeks ago. So this is bringing water from tank 7 all the way down Pleasant Valley Road, Res 9, and then actually starts to cut across Mother Lode and crosses Highway 50, Res 11 into Res 12. Res 12 is technically two of the concrete tanks there. So again, we have about 85 acres here, longer distance main, and about half of that being vegetated. Next slide, please. There we go. And you can see we're getting more into that similar kind of chaparral type habitat there. This, fortunately, is a little bit easier to maintain once you get in there, but it does kind of Medusa's head. It grows back. You cut one, and 5 more oaks or manzanita grow back from it. So it's pretty labor intensive as far as return interval, but it's easy to take care of. So you can see a couple of the vaults here. Some of them kind of obscured by various leaf litter, etc. So next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to jump to the north side of the freeway from 4 Bay Water Treatment Plant, and this is EDM 1, El Dorado Main 1, in the upper right, Reservoir 1 Water Treatment Plant, Gilmore Road, in Pollock Pines. And then that line roughly follows Pony Express, kind of Carson, and then starts to head north up towards Union Ridge and hits our numbered reservoirs, so 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5, and 6 is kind of down in the middle there. And eventually ends up at Gold Hill, and that will tie into the Gold Hill intertie. This also a pretty long facility, about 141 acres. Same thing, a little bit more than half is vegetated. And we say vegetated, that's vegetation needing maintenance, not just grass, obviously. Next slide, please. And this was where we got to tour last Christmas break. Brian M. and I got to go out with some of our staff and see some of these, or at least try to see some of these facilities. And this is the project that Patrick and Kaylee presented to you of inspecting some of the AR relief valves once we knew that issue with early December with the repair, and do a condition assessment. So they were even having a hard time finding these facilities. You can see why. So next slide, please. Okay, EDM 2. And EDM 1, EDM 2 kind of weave past each other, and our engineering staff are working on a process right now to look at how these facilities are run and perhaps do a little bit of reconfiguration. Interties are one of those to help better move water east to west, where we know we have that current and continuing to grow demand. So this line technically begins at Res 2 at Snows Road, also terminates the Gold Hill intertie. Same thing, about 95 acres, a little bit more than half of that being vegetated. Next slide, please. And this was one Patrick provided these slides. Somewhere buried in that mass on the left was this, I think, a blow-off and an ARB, I think. seem to recall. So you could see some of the roots and things that they had to cut off of there. So definitely hasn't been maintained in a while, that's clear. So next slide, please. And this is kind of a Highway 193 project. We're out in that area. And then the famous Slide Park Intertie. Although it's not currently in operation, we want to maintain that and have the ability to obviously restore that. And Brian will be talking to you at our next meeting, the CIP workshop, talk about that project amongst many other important investments. So this one's a little bit shorter line, about 35 acres and about 2/3 of that. And this is kind of when you're driving up that first snow shed on Highway 50 looking to the right, that big Weber Canyon, that's really what you're looking at here. So that kind of tells you the type of work that we're working through. So this would be move treated water back and forth. So historically, that raw water line went back into the reservoir there. At least at this point, I don't think our staff are planning to need to reestablish that line now being a proposed treated water line going forward. Next slide, please. So we've moved a little bit back up the hill, so you start to see some more of the cedars, things like that. But you can see the approximate age of these, 20, 30 years, some of them a little bit longer, that the trees have elected to reestablish themselves, and some of the brush, especially up in that area. So next slide, please. Okay, now the GHI, our Gold Hill Intertie. So now we're kind of on the western end. This is the last of our big transmission mains bringing water east to west. So up on the right there, up Gold Hill Road, that area, kind of the area down by the golf course, a little bit, Cold Springs, taking water from Gold Hill and bringing it where it officially terminates, kind of off screen there at the Oak Ridge tanks there on Silva Valley Road. Same thing, a little bit less than half vegetated. So we're starting to come in more of the Oak Savanna, a little bit more open area, but we are crossing a lot of chaparral on the way down. So next slide, please. And more of the same, obviously. I think you've seen enough photos of vegetation, but it kind of gives you a sense of the work that we're evaluating right now. So a lot of this stuff, a lot more scrubby brush rather than trees, things like that. We had, just by way of anecdote, we similarly downstream of Res 12 last week, working with the Bureau of Land Management and going in 12-foot tall manzanita and trying to find that line. That leak was actually found by one of our customers. To show you how dense some of these areas are. So that we're hiking in that area. So next slide, please. Okay, so what's the significance of a right-of-way maintenance program? Obviously, it protects the integrity of our lines, provides routine access for inspection, and importantly, helps us access some of our maintenance needs. We have about 350 above-ground structures located all across these 120 miles, so about 3 per mile. And it also potentially in the future, as technology advances, may give us the ability to do some of this this evaluation remotely. And so some of the industry standards now are looking at summer aerial photo interpretation. Look for, especially in our area in California, you see green in the middle of the summer. You shouldn't see that around here, and so that's an indication that we probably have a leak somewhere. And then obviously, when time is of the essence, provides for quick access for repairs. Okay, next slide, please. So we looked at sort of 2 different options. The first one, similar to the way we've done some of our other vegetation maintenance contracts or vegetation treatment contracts, to contract that out. So we looked at developing a specification for a bidding process, and we could do either one large, the whole chunk, a multi-series, multi-year project, or potentially do it into smaller, more distinct segments by transmission main or by a milepost. One of the drawbacks and one of the things that really sort of swung the pendulum for us and our thoughts and recommendations to you is working in people's backyards. And is that really what we want to have contractors do? And especially when we're working through prescriptive easements, trying to develop and maintain, hopefully, a long-term relationship with our customers. And then when you have contractors that aren't familiar, and we've got 350 very important facilities sitting above, last thing we want to do is damage one of these lines. That would be catastrophic. So air relief valves and blow-offs, those are the 2 types of appurtenance there. Okay, next slide, please. So the other option would be, should we try to do this in-house? We looked at our existing staff resource, obviously, from the field staff standpoint, with our existing maintenance needs, we just honestly don't have the ability, and that's why you see what you see out there right now. So if we were to do that, we would need to have additional trained, skilled staff to do that work. Most often you see a 3-person crew, and that's just for workflow of trimming the vegetation, getting it into the chipper, et cetera. Then we would need to look at what's the appropriate equipment. So we've done some specifications for the types of equipment that would be necessary in order to determine a cost investment. And then, honestly, right now, recruiting for skilled labor is a very challenging environment. We're up against PG&E, and you see those vehicles everywhere. Last year, I had a crew from Florida for PG&E in my front yard trimming, so it kind of shows you the market right now. Next slide, please. So our recommended approach, and we wanted to get your feedback so we can get direction on how to proceed with tackling this issue, is to look at really developing a comprehensive program and try to get us back on the right track here that's managed by district staff. We would be having direct interaction with customers, right-of-way entry agreements, potentially, if we want to have a more formal easement, and have a regular visitation, whether or not it's every 3 to 5 years. It's really going to depend on the type of vegetation, what our frequency of returning, with the goal of just being able to access and maintain these lines. When we did some of the costing out, it ended up being about, considering the most recent bidding process and the current bidding environment, about half the cost. Assuming about a ½ acre per day, and about 2.4 years to kind of do the Golden Gate Bridge, if you will, all the way around and back. So, even if our costs are off by a little, clearly right now it's more economic to do that work in-house. And we would be prioritizing the most critical needs, and then have the ability to look out at other facilities. We'll go on the next slide. Sorry, Director Osborne, did you have a question? Okay, great. So our proposed next steps, pending your direction today, would be to include the equipment for a crew in the CIP. So we would have a new CIP in that workshop. We've got a quote from Sourcewell, which is a pre-bidding, or excuse me, a previously bid nationwide for equipment and things like that. We would need a track chipper. We have actually a trailer chipper now. We did get through a CAL FIRE grant a couple years ago, and that is used honestly quite regularly now. But as you can anticipate, towing that's not going to work everywhere, and more of the track chipper concept would be more appropriate in this case. And then a crew truck, as well as a way to tow this track chipper around. And then the staff, being a non-CIP, those operating costs would hit the operating budget, drinking water operating budget. Be 3 staff, approximately $100,000 per when you look at salary, benefits, et cetera. And then as well as we need to equip those staff. Okay, next slide, please. So I also want to just talk, obviously our main objective is maintaining our lines. And we started working on this before the unfortunate events a couple months ago. So unfortunately, it just reinforces this. That the vegetation maintenance, our right-of-ways, does provide some community wildfire safety benefit. Whenever we talk with the firefighters, and we have one in here today, they talk about the 3 R's: ridges, roads, and rights-of-way. And that's 3 locations, and hopefully to be able to stop a fire. So if we can help in any of that regard, obviously we would want that to be the case. When we had that fire up here a couple months, probably 2 months ago, they were actually bulldozing right over the EDM1, and so Rodenko's watching the SCADA, making sure hopefully they didn't damage. So it's not a great feeling, and so to the extent that we can have the ability to decrease the likelihood of having damage to one of these important arteries, the better off we are. And then we do want to hit some other areas that are on the list, is not as high. We have some large distribution mains. That one I told you about at Res 12 technically isn't a transmission main, but it's a really important cross-country distribution main. Project 184 facilities, we know all too well about those now, and as well as Sly Park, continue that great work that we've been doing for almost 4 decades now. So, and I think that's it. Yep, that's it. Director Osborne.
You partially answered a question. A 3-person crew you think is sufficient to do
Yes.
that? One of the advantage I think would be if operationally we needed some additional help because we had a catastrophic break someplace or multiple breaks, we would have some people that would be in the system, knowing how it works and and we'd be able to utilize those people off the vegetation management project, repairs or whatever, in case of a catastrophic failure or need of additional crews. One of the things I think would be important would be to make sure that all of those people are given herbicide training, make sure that they get the appropriate licenses and everything to apply herbicides. And that it becomes very critical on government land or specific herbicides can be used and not used on government property. And you should probably carte blanche across the whole system to make sure that the public even knows that we'll do only everything that would be. But I strongly support the crew idea. I think it's a much more viable option than contracting. You'd have control over which of the facilities you would think would need to be the priorities. And we own a lot of property, and so I would support that.
Thank you.
Director Day?
Yeah, to kind of follow along with what George was saying, I think, I was thinking about our line replacement crews, and I think the idea of cross-training. So in a pinch, you can shift people back and forth. Plus, it also, I think, from an employee standpoint, they engage more. They're not doing necessarily the same thing year in, year out. They get a break and go do other things occasionally.
Right.
And it's also good for us because then we can allocate them, when there's something's a higher priority.
Thank you. Director Anzini?
Yeah, turn it on. A couple things. One is it's probably past due for us to even come up with this. And considering the sensitivity of the most recent tragedies that we've had, we're right there and we need to be premeditative as you can talk about it. But the real issues are we've got a large area that we're responsible for, and being good caretakers of it, that we need to make sure that the people around those areas is also protected. Those may be our lines, but the adjoining people that are in these areas are going to look at us as, are you proper stewards of your property? We certainly are. Or does the reverse. It says, we're being proper stewards of our property to be safe for you as our neighbors, but it also sends a message to the neighbors that they need to be proper stewards of their property. So, the ultimate gain here is it's a good gain for all of us. And, the possibility of people pointing fingers at blaming us for fires is very high because people are very sensitive right now. A lot of people have went through loss. So I appreciate the fact that we are doing this, really important, because those are the things that I hear, the bugs as I hear, I walk this trail, why aren't you maintaining this? And it's along, your main trails. So this is good. As for staff, this is called a heartbreak for human resources, because when you're trying to recruit people, people who want to become pipeline supervisors and the career changes, where what you're doing is you're hiring utility people. So like you defined, they can cross-connect when we need to pull them off of one project and put them in the other. So maybe it just all boils down to adding more staff and making sure those people are going to be loyal. But on an emergency basis, it makes sense to me to contract it so we can at least get a head start on it. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Anzini. I've got a couple of questions, and I'm not sure I'm aligned with my fellow board members on this one exactly. Do we have a vegetation management crew right now?
Currently, we have we have a property maintenance technician and a pest and vegetation technician that are responsible from everything from managed district properties to maintaining the vegetation around our lift station, things like that. They're currently part of the hydroelectric crew, and they spend a lot of their time obviously up the hill because of that, just the amount of work that's up there. Those are the staff that do have the QAC, Qualified Applicator Certification for proper application of pesticides, et cetera. And those are the same staff that use the trailered chipper that we have now from the CAL FIRE grant.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yeah.
I guess the equipment would be, so we have the organizational framework right now to just insert some more capacity, if you will, by adding staff to manage that. Okay, that's good. As far as equipment, track chippers are great. But how about a masticator? It looks like a lot of the areas we looked at, a masticator would be a preferred approach.
We actually looked at that, and maybe certain locations where that's appropriate. Where we're most cognizant of the areas where we're going literally behind people's backyards and the propensity of masticators to throw and cause damage to private property.
More than 30
Okay.
feet.
Yeah, so it is true that there may be other locations where a different tool is appropriate. That was one that seemed most appropriate for the majority of the locations. And that's the one you saw most recently being employed at the Sled Park Recreation Area in combination with a feeding equipment. So.
Okay, thanks. And then in concert with Director Anzini's concerns, we certainly don't want to start a fire with our activities. And I think there are some, especially if you're on forest land, there's some pretty strict requirements about having a water tank and a pump and so much hose to deal with any inadvertent ignition.
Right.
So are we prepared and trained to do that kind of thing too?
So there's actually multiple parts to your question. I'll try to answer each one of those. So in terms of responsibility the contractors held and that we're held to, we're working on Forest Service lands. A fire safety plan is actually a required contractor submittal through Brian's group that's reviewed by General Counsel's office. And then our staff, as part of our special youth authorization, we have that. We have actually looked most recently, because you probably saw Placer County Water Agency staff helped stop a wildfire before it had grown larger. Brian P. had turned me on to that story. So we are looking at perhaps doing some, whether it's the 40-hour course or some basic suppression, more training than what we have now. We have the water backpacks, we have the hand tools, et cetera, but just to help. Unfortunately, this is becoming all too common. In terms of the fire risks, we would never be in an area doing something that would increase the risk, right? So similar to the way our crews do now, where we're doing the timing of our herbicide treatments and other vegetation, we follow the terrain, follow the moisture condition, and there may be, like yesterday, clearly you would not be doing anything with that had the ability to generate a spark. So I think part of it is intelligence, part of it, do we need to invest in a water buggy type concept? Maybe that's appropriate as well, or can we repurpose an older one? But part of it's being smart and being responsible. So.
Good. And then finally, I think maybe what we need to, if the board gives a nod, what we need to look at is maybe a hybrid that's not just our crews, because there are certain advantages of having additional staff that can be used for other emergencies. But there's also some advantages to having a contractor that has that kind of skill to do those things. And instead of a 2 or 3 year project, we might be able to accelerate it a little bit. So I'd like us to look at what areas are appropriate for contractors. And I know that the delicate issue of dealing with the landowners is important. We want to maintain those good relationships that we have. But we're going to have to do that whether it's our crew or a contractor crew. We're going to have somebody out there working with the landowners to make sure that we're together. So I might propose that we do kind of a strategic plan for this, in addition to what you've already done, that says, okay, phase one is get all the right-of-ways, and ideally we'd get recorded easements as we go through this process so that we could preclude any future problem. And then look at the risk. I don't know if there's the different vegetation types that we go through is go from the higher elevation down to the low. I don't know, are oak trees more damaging to our pipelines than pine trees? Is there some kind of
I don't know, we didn't go, you know, anything with deep root system is what we're concerned about. I don't know if the one per se in terms of
Yeah, okay.
failure risk, yeah.
But do some kind of risk assessment of where do we, I'm sure you've done that already, is where do we really need to start first? And then look at who's most appropriate to do that segment of work, the contractor or our own. So I'd just ask you to take a look. I know the contractor costs that you had quoted in there seem pretty high to me, based on our experience.
Pretty high.
It's, you know, a couple $1,000s an acre is what shaded fuel breaks are going for. And granted, they use masticators, not handwork, a lot of the time. So we might need to relook at that and say, is there some sweet spot or hybrid that would be a better approach?
Great, thank you. I know General Manager Abercrombie, did you want to add something I was going to add? after
Yeah,
that?
I think that's a great suggestion, and I think in some of the areas where they're very large parcels, that we can identify a clear easement, and we could bid it out. Maybe those situations make sense for a contractor to come in when we're getting near smaller parcels where it may be a little more sensitive, because we have a lot of customers. I would really prefer to use our staff. You'll find in the next slide what I would call just the quality of our construction crews, the ownership of our assets. You'll see those pictures and you'll see the end slide. And when we're near customer facilities, I want our guys out there because they're the best. So I think the hybrid approach is a good suggestion. We'll look at it primarily parcel by parcel, but I think the request is, let's budget for it this year. If we come in with a contract for certain areas, we'll just bring that to the board for consideration.
Yeah, I think what I hear you asking, which is really legitimate, is a risk management, fire risk management plan. And I think there's consensus is to move forward, but can you bring back more detail for us about that? Because that is a huge issue, and as we're working through the summer through these areas, we need to be able to, if something happens, I mean, equipment backfires and things happen, so we need to have a plan in place. So I think that's an excellent idea.
Thank you. Director Anzini?
Just a question, it may sound like a stupid question, I'm sorry.
No stupid
But
questions.
do we have a person who is a real estate property manager?
We used to have a real estate agent. Now that's a combination. I'll have Brian, give more detail, because that responsibility is primarily under Brian P. Brian M. and Brian P. help with a lot for the new projects, the engineers and general counsel. As far as right-of-way of existing facilities, honestly, our property management technician, in terms of our existing vegetation, he will go in and work with our neighbors, et cetera, there, but we don't have a full-time position that is simply right-of-way. So I don't know, Brian, if you want to add anything to that.
That's right, Dan. We did away with the right-of-way position some years ago now, and kind of reallocated the responsibilities. So Brian Mueller and I, along with our collective staff, I referred to this earlier, where we try and work together to to obtain, record, negotiate, and so forth, easements and rights of way. This may be an opportunity for us to relook at that and see if that's the best way to move forward or not. So appreciate you asking that question.
And the reason why I asked is just my previous career. I mean, it was a much larger water company, but they did have they had a lot of property also, but they did have real estate managers or even agents who just dealt with only on the liens and the notifications of the property owner. So it wasn't just a simple part of doing the legal part. What it was the connection to the customers or neighbors to the allotted property. So that person actually was up in front, kind of a PR thing too, to give them notification, we have this thing. So it also shows a legal form. In a way, it puts a legal face in there.
Thank you. Director Osborne.
I would not be surprised with our employment benefit packages and everything else that we don't get some people that work for fire agencies that are on a seasonal basis to come and work for us on a year time, that have fire training, have been in the business for a while, and would be a real asset to us. So just a thought, you know. I wouldn't be a bit surprised that Allison will be deluged with people.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think we wholeheartedly support the effort. It's just how we're going to do it, that we need to get a little finer details. So thank you for the presentation, man.
Yeah, thank you. Are we done with the slides? I think we are, right? Okay, just want to double check. We are listening to you and want to recall where I was in the presentation. Just one additional point that in terms of when we do decide to contract things out, I want to raise the Reservoir A water treatment plant as a classic example. Large parcel, as General Manager mentioned, large parcel. In this case, we're the owner of the parcel, but that just made more sense from the amount of work there. That was a nice, distinct project. We were able to repurpose, is just a quick board update on it, we were able to repurpose some of still the yet remaining Weber Reservoir grant funds to pay for that. We did not, unfortunately, we weren't successful with the very competitive CAL FIRE grants, but we were able to get that project grant paid by a contractor. So just that's an example of where we're not always just defaulting to one assumption. We're evaluating each of these, and I really appreciate your feedback this morning. So.
Great. I guess that would lead to one you just reminded me. Would we be using our vegetation crews if we hire some to do work around the reservoirs as well as on the transmission lines?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, most
good
definitely.
answer. Stop.
Thank you.
Do we want to call for additional board comment or public comment on information item number 6?
Yes, please.
No additional board comment, and it does not appear that there are any members of the public wishing to speak on information item number 6.
Thank you. Moving on to information item number 7. I think this is a good news story.
Yes, Mr. President, it is. John Kessler, representing Operations and Engineering. And as you know, we've been under an emergency declaration for the emergency rehabilitation of Outingdale Dam. Have completed that project. We want to provide you with the status. And first, go back to where we began and what we've achieved. Next, please. We look at the summary of issues, the extreme drought conditions and the drying of the Middle Fork and Consumnes River. It gave us an opportunity to enter the normally flowing river channel and conduct a detailed inspection of the dam. The inspection revealed that significant damage and deterioration had occurred and warranting emergency rehabilitation. And the purpose of that was to prevent catastrophic failure and to maintain our essential water surface to the Outingdale community. The board had declared an emergency regarding the dam, allowing for expedited emergency restoration. I believe it was the August 9th board meeting, and the work was completed on September 30th. Just to reorient ourselves as we talk about some of the sections looking upstream here, we basically go in descending order from 1 to 7, 1 being the far left or abutment, and sections being divided by the buttress walls all the way over to the spillway section, section 6, and then the left abutment or right side of our picture, section 7. Next, please. And looking back at what we started with, you see the buttress wall here that is beginning to be undermined and significantly deteriorated. You see a hanging by just a thread of cable, a section of from section 2 of the dam that has since been cut loose. You see the sandbags, which we no longer rely on sandbags for the structure, so that's an improvement. Next, please. If we look at section 2, you see the significant voids. You see water pouring through the dam. That's because those are openings, and those looked even larger once we got the debris and vegetation cleared away. Those are definitely through holes that were leading to uncontrol of water. Next, please. Looking closely at that section, you can see not only the breakage, the loss of the structure on the crest, but you also see a large opening that was completely through. And you see some of the limited reinforcing steel, the vertical by the red arrow there within the buttress wall. And part of the observations within the assessment was the limited reinforcing steel that could basically maintain the structure for any duration going forward. And as we looked at the buttress walls, we saw voids underneath, we saw loss of sections, we saw significant erosion of the concrete itself, and it was just not long for this world. But as you recall, the buttress walls is what hold up the structure. That's the main support, and without those, it was very concerning in terms of how this dam would carry forward in its current condition or previous condition. Or looks at the openings and the underneath and voids underneath the buttress walls. Next, please. And looking at sections 3 through 5, you see the more through cracks. You see, again, significant loss of concrete, and we found very minimal reinforcing steel to hold all these pieces together, which over time it began to separate at cold joints. Next, please. And the buttress wall, looking to the right or far left in dam reference, basically was being supported by, it was significantly deteriorated, and the left section of the dam was made up by sandbags. And we're looking at the flashboard section with the boards in place. Next, please. And just a view from farther downstream to see the extent of the previous condition. Next, please. And the upstream face was really just as telling as the downstream, with significant loss, erosion, ramming, loss of concrete from trees that had come down, I believe, under flood conditions, and had led to serious damage to the structure itself and loss of its integrity. Next, please. So, as we transition to the fix, the initial setup was installing a cofferdam and the bypass system so we could dewater the dam itself. Next, please. And this is with the dam dewatered, as you see to the right, and the bypass system functioning to keep up with it. You see the condition of the concrete on the upstream face now that it's been cleaned. It's not any more comforting than the previous views and badly needed some help. You also see the line that we've cut that divided the old from the new. So we basically built the new reinforced section in that upper half of the wall. If you recall, the previous repairs made in 2014, 2015 era were holding up pretty well on the lower section of the wall. So our focus was the upstream wall, and also the structure is thicker as you go down towards the base. And so that was comforting to know that we felt good about leaving that as is. We also didn't want to have to dewater and remove a bunch of sand. We also anticipated that our time could be limited for construction, so we didn't want to take on any more than we absolutely had to, while still looking at making the structure good for decades to come. Next, please. And looking close at some of the structure, from looking in the left photo at one of the buttress walls to looking at a side view from right to left. In that right photo, you can see just how far the structure was deteriorated. Next, please. So here we are at the right abutment, looking downstream. This is Ryan and Dylan, and you never know it, but Ryan on the left was actually a victim of the Caldor fire from his home in Grizzly Flat. The guy had the most incredible attitude working throughout the project, and hats off to him for all of his contributions, but the whole crew, in fact. But you see the reinforcing steel, the larger number 8 bar, 1 inch going vertical, and the smaller number 5/5/8 running around it. You see that the number 8s are doweled into the structure as planned. Next. Here's a view looking from right to left at the upstream. So this was his plan to establish a grid of steel mat to basically hold the concrete in place and also to reinforce it from the battering of future trees impact. And this platform set up for access on the pond side, upstream side. Sure,
How old was this dam?
about 100 years.
So it's been 100 years since it's had any really good reinforcement.
We had done some repairs. You see the concrete on the
Right.
right, Director Anzini? That was, I believe, from 2005.
Okay,
And it looked like from some of the concrete that had broke off on the crest, that was a subsequent repair that probably preceded the district's involvement with the project. But again, the lack of steel reinforcing to kind of tie everything together and give it the longevity it needed and the ability to withstand that kind of battering over time, it really was lacking.
okay, thank you.
Sure. Next, please. So looking on the downstream side, you can see the rebar mat that was placed around the buttress walls and across the downstream face. You can see the doweling of the 1-inch or number 8 bars going into the bedrock there, particularly on the photo on the right. You see that they're epoxied in, that little kind of reddish color is the epoxy. And the smaller rebar mat that goes around it, basically 12-inch on center. Next, please. And this gives you a broader view of the overall downstream face in terms of the amount of steel that was added to the structure. We were able to open up an original drain and help maintain the dewatering, and we basically restored that to where it can be reused for any future maintenance. So the blue pipe is currently cut off and plugged on the downstream face should we ever need to dewater the structure and perform more maintenance. Next, please. Here you see some of the form work. This is Jeremy and Devin, left and right. Jeremy actually was thinking about how the heck do I get the boards to follow the contours of these unusual shaped rocks, and he had an epiphany one morning about 2 in the morning before he took this on, and he basically developed a method to have to draw a scribe on the form board, on the lower portion of the form board, by running his ruler vertically up and down over that face, that contour, and basically draw with a pen the contour up on the form board. And it worked out beautifully. It was a great fit. So hats off to these guys for their ingenuity, their inventiveness to adapt to some really difficult conditions. The photo on the, excuse me.
I just wanted to say that's very admirable, because this is a one-off. This is not something you can just draw on the CAD and say, oh, go do this. This has to be done in the field, because everything is unique.
That's
So
absolutely
it's
right.
very, I mean, just watching all this, very impressive.
And all the more challenging, you
Yeah.
know, for these guys to adapt to kind of typical form work where you pour a slab and stand up square rectangular walls. This is not that. The view from on the left there shows the, with more of the form boards in place, but just a view of how that was coming together. Next, please. So this is September 21st, 4 in the morning. It was set up for this pour because the first truck was coming at 5, and that was just a function of we wanted to get enough trucks in succession that we could complete the pour, and that was a time that we could arrange with the supplier to be able to accommodate that. And so we began pouring from basically right to left. Next, please. And we had a full moon that night, so that helped with the lighting conditions too. Yes. And this is Devin smiling at us. He's actually Justine's husband and was part of the water division that was able to help us out on Barrow. And so you can see the concrete beginning to fill the forms on that far side. Next, please. So as you see, we're working our way from right to left and also filling the buttress walls as we go. You can see the concrete, the yellow-handled device is a vibratory wand that helps eliminate any voids in the concrete and give us a real tight fill around the irregular shaped concrete that we're pouring against, as well as around the reinforcing steel. You can also see on the upstream side, that edge is the angle iron with the lugs on it. Just below the top of the board is, yeah, there you go, and back closer to the pumper on the upstream side. Jennifer. Anyway, if you can see a piece of angle iron there with lugs kind of coming towards us, that's part of the new reinforcement to give us additional endurance against impact from loading trees. Next, please. There you go. That's it.
Oh, here.
You got it. And there's, yeah, that's more of it. So here, more concrete being placed and vibrated and placed and finished. Next, please. And to give us access for the buttress walls, the tops are left open, and then we worked with the mix to gradually stack it and place it and finish it. So Kiki Robles convinced me that he was going to be able to stack it, and he was darn right. He got it done. I wasn't sure about that. I hadn't seen that done before to that extent. Next, please. So the finished product, the upstream face, you can see that finish line going across to the right of the flash of the spillway of old versus new. And we did complete some additional patching on that upstream face to the extent that took care of everything that needed attention at this point. And you can see that the top upstream edge of the crest, you can see that reinforcing steel that now provides additional endurance for the dam from impact. You can also see we have a step-down section on the far right, and that is kind of the auxiliary spillway. So should we be caught with incoming flood that where we have our flashboards in place, we're not able to remove those before the flood arrives, the design is for that right section to overflow and spill, and then allow us to have access on the left side here in the near ground and still pull the boards. And we have prepared some new flashboards for the water division, made up of 4x6 by 7 foot long, and made up of with pins and also a fork, so that from that crest you can reach over and reach down and pull the boards, even when there's overpour condition going on. And there will be a hand railing installed on the downstream side with sleeves that's removable during flood conditions, so that we have the safety of access to tie off or hold on to during that kind of work. Who goes running
Is there a signal that,
to remove the flashboards?
yeah, who runs and
Oh.
who does that?
Well, the pond is, monitored, and the
Okay.
inflow conditions are monitored by Water Division
Okay.
and the treatment operators who maintain the pump station. And we know when it rains, when to look for
The
new.
flood, so.
So I think Brian has the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. shift. Yeah.
I'll be there.
Does anybody live in the neighborhood?
All right. It's not like the Dutch boy putting the finger in the dike.
No. Next, please. And the downstream side, you can see the kind of the increase in dimensions of the buttress walls in order to add that reinforcing grid steel. You can see we added a little bit of texture with chamfer strips to give it a little bit of look. And the edges on all the structure have been chamfered as well to give it that beveled, nicer finish and less susceptible to breakage over time or freeze thaw spalling. And finally, next please. So here's our crew after completing the pour.
Where's our hard hats?
Well, we were done work. So far left, Tilde. Next from left is Kiki Robles, our lead for the project. Dylan, who's next above him. Ryan Rodriguez. Down below Ryan, or far left, is Devin.
Good job.
And then Jeremy Faber, he was on loan from Collections. Gio on the right, and Corbin. And we had a mix of people over time, but this was the crew on pour day. But I also want to say that this was a whole district effort. Water Division, Collections, Hydro, all provided the staff to provide this, to do this work and bring kind of the best of the ideas together and skills. And we're just pleased to have this quality of crew. We had finances help with getting the project set up, with getting our materials procured on time without causing any delay in the field. We had help from the shop, the fabricators, when it came to getting our steel cut and those lugs put on for the angle pieces. We had help from legal and our right-of-way folks in terms of getting our access agreement together at the front end of the project so we could get on the site, and just on and on. So just pleased to be a part of that, and thank you for your support.
Great job, John. And this was at the, I think in the middle of the Caldor fire heading over the hill. We had crews dispersed here to get this work done before the rain started hitting.
Okay, thank you. Other board comments? Very good. What was the total time from start to finish?
It was about 5 weeks
Wow.
from the time we started dewatering to the time that we completed the work in the field.
Well, what a testimony to our staff. I think we should have a plaque put on the face of the dam that says, you took ownership of it, you did it, you engineered it, the team fabricated it. So I think we really should have something to memorialize that effort.
Well, it's very much a we effort.
I think they got to put their handprints in it.
Too late. It was fast drying, Con.
Yeah, Grandpappy told me he put his book there 100 years ago.
Well, I accidentally left a paw print there too,
there
but
you
I fixed it.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the team. Any other board comments? Jim?
This is why we like to have our crews do the vegetation. The quality of our crews going out there and doing this type of work is just top notch.
Which is going to lead us into the next one here in a minute. Okay, thanks. Any public comment on this information item?
It does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on information item number 7.
Okay, great. Let's do thumbs if you thought they did a great job. We won't vote. Good. Director items number 8. This is one I thought was very important. I'm sure that my fellow board members agree with me, is the effort that our team, our staff members, our management team put into keeping the operation going through the catastrophe of the Caldor fire are just incredible. And I thought it was important that we recognize the entire district team for what they've done. And, you know, I guess it's like the old Timex commercial, if you're old enough to remember, takes a licking and keeps on ticking. Well, that's kind of what the district did. We took some knocks, but the water was never turned off. Our customers continued to receive service in both water and wastewater. And I think it's really, and people filled in where they needed to fill in. It was not any of this, it's not my job, and people were kind of shuffled around to different areas to provide support while the priority, the responsible team member went to do something else. So it was just a fantastic effort, and I think the magnitude of the fire and the disaster and the way that our team filled in deserves some recognition. So that's what we have here. Director Anzini.
Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback on that. The important thing is this called teamwork, and it's very, very invested in this company. People who work here are loyal with each other, they trust each other, and it shows out in the community they live. The other part that we have to kind of also recognize is this is all during a major global pandemic, and many of our employees have been struck by that too. So just like the general public, they have continued to muster on and make sure that the water and our wastewater services are always running. And if we're not hearing anything from the public, it's because they're happy. And that's all I can say is, you know, as board members, you see all types of people, but if you're not hearing anything, you know everything is fine. And I appreciate all of staff, including upper management, on handling everything, so much appreciation.
Thank you, Director Anzini. Director Day?
Well, yeah, I was going to suggest, Mr. President, did you want to read the resolution so we can make a motion then? I think,
Actually, I was going to ask Jennifer to read it since she has a much better speaking voice than I do. Director Osborne, did you have?
I just wanted to add my 2 cents worth to it. I mean, having been in the emergency services business for 40-some years, I recognize some of the things that, the nuances of things that happen that you never even hear about. And it even started with Jim's outreach to Grizzly Flat, saying, hey, can we help you? You know, and I don't know what we did or anything else, but it precipitated all the way down to all the crew, and a job well done. And we've got some master work to get done to get it repaired, but I know we're on top of that, so have at it.
Thank you. Jennifer, could I impose on you to read the resolution?
Absolutely. Resolution of the Board of Directors of El Dorado Irrigation District recognizing the exemplary public service provided by district employees during the Calder Fire. Whereas El Dorado Irrigation District provides critical water services and wastewater services to the residents of El Dorado County, and whereas the Calder Fire, which began on August 14th, 2021, and eventually burned over 220,000 acres within El Dorado County, becoming one of the largest wildfires in California history. And whereas, as a result of the Calder Fire, dozens of district employees were evacuated from their home, some for more than 2 weeks. And whereas notwithstanding the evacuations and throughout the duration of the Calder Fire, district employees continue to report to work to perform their essential public service. And whereas throughout the duration of the Calder Fire, district employees took and continue to take action in response to the Calder Fire in an effort to ensure safe and continuous water and wastewater services to the public. Now therefore be it, and here it is hereby resolved by the Board of Directors of the El Dorado Irrigation District that the sacrifices made and actions taken by district employees throughout the duration of the Calder Fire shall be recognized for their exemplary public service and commitment to the district customers and the residents of El Dorado County.
thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I'd
Sorry,
like
I
to-
didn't, it just caught me because like Pat mentioned and John Kessler mentioned, a lot of these people were displaced from their homes, and their commitment to the county, their commitment to their coworkers and their families, and the one gentleman that ended up losing his home. I mean, you can't find better folks than here at EID.
Thank you very much.
Hear me up. I would like to move option 1.
Thank you, Director Day.
And I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Anzini. Any other board comments? Is there any public comment on this item?
It does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
President, if I had one comment. One, I want to thank the board for the recognition for the employees as kind of the general manager here working through this with so many different staff people. You know, you listened to me a few times, but there's so many of those guys and ladies that just did a great job through the entire event, whether out there in the fire zone trying to save assets or whether they're displaced and going to work anyway to make sure our customers get great service. I'm very honored to help be the general manager for this group. It's a very remarkable group.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I would like to suggest that we send this resolution to the Mountain Democrat, and also we put it on our next door, on our, I have Jesse put it on the next door, so everybody knows that we recognize the extraordinary effort by our employees.
Thank you. Okay, let's vote.
Director Osborne, we're waiting for your vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you all very much. And thank you again to the whole EID team. Okay. Action item 9.
We already did.
Okay, for the general warrant register. And thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Day. Any board comments on the paying the bills? Any public comment on action item 9, the general warrant register?
It does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
Okay, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 10, purchase of a excavator, which is a misnomer, I think, for this use, right?
All right, President Dwyer, members of the board, good morning. Normally, we have our fleet supervisor do this presentation, but since the majority of this information is related to the technical analysis, I'll lead the presentation, but I do want to acknowledge we have both Jason and Greg. Greg, our newest fleet supervisor here, to answer any technical questions, or excuse me, any specific equipment-related questions. Today, unfortunately, I'm here to give some not very favorable news about the watershed above Slide Park and what we're doing to help ensure the integrity of that water supply in the years ahead. Next slide, please. So as we've talked about all morning, and I know it's tough, and I know this is very tough steps to follow from our prior presentation. Thank you very much. The Camp Creek watershed was significantly impacted by the Caldor fire, and that we should be expected to expect debris flows, i.e. landslides, mud flows, over the next 3 to 5 years and potentially longer. And I'll explain why in a minute. The Camp Creek, just for orientation, members of the public, the Camp Creek watershed via Camp Creek Tunnel is the primary water source for the inflow to Slide Park Reservoir. We have 2 localized watersheds, Park Creek and Hazel Creek, of course, in Hazel Creek Tunnel, that can provide inflow. But under normal circumstances, the Camp Creek watershed provides the entirety or most of the inflow to the reservoir. Therefore, maintaining this diversion is really going to be essential to our water supply security in the years ahead. As part of that, and through an interdisciplinary team with our engineering and operations staff, they spent a lot of time analyzing how to best and safely maintain this facility until we can get to that recovery stage within the within the watershed. And what they determined is that an excavator will be necessary to maintain that dam and diversion free of debris clogging flows that will preclude our ability to exercise our water, including large trees. Okay, next slide, please. So just a quick background, the Caldor, as I presented to you last board meeting, the fire did impact the watershed for all 5 treatment plants. But the Slide Park watershed was the most impacted. And subsequent to our last board presentation, some of the experts from our partner agencies have presented some detailed graphics to illustrate that. In total, about 85% of the watershed is burned, which, all fire is not bad, but in this case, the majority was, unfortunately. and that there's near total tree mortality in very large portions of the watershed. I had the opportunity with General Manager Abercrombie to visit, do a complete tour of all of our watersheds, and the results were pretty stark. We were fortunate that our partners from CAL FIRE, Forest Service, and California Geologic Survey, they have what's called a rapid response team, and they came to meet with us even before the fire was fully contained to advise us as to what to expect going forward. That's all they do, is they go around the state, unfortunately, and advise partners of how to respond to these types of issues. And they did advise us that we should expect debris flows within the watershed for the next 3 to 5 years, and potentially longer, depending upon hydrology and how the watershed does react. And really the cause of that is thousands and thousands and thousands of dead trees and unstable hydrophobic soils, and I'll explain that a little bit more here in a second. Next slide, please. So this was the map that they presented, presented in mid-September. So this was before fire was fully contained, so you can see there's a little bit more growth around Kirkwood. That's not represented on here, but that's not necessarily material to our discussion today. So just orientation, this large amorphous here, that's the 220,000 acres that you referred to in your prior agenda item. The shading is the soil severity burn. So in general, green is good. Green is less severe, low intensity burn. Yellow, orange, high, and then red is the worst, unfortunately. So just, I think we all have a general orientation, and I'm going to have another slide here to zoom in. But generally on the southwest corners where that fire started, and that real heavy red, high intensity area was really that first, those first 2 days, or technically day 3 and 4 of the fire, but those first two, that day 16th, 17th, 18th, those two burning periods. You see most of that area is moderate to high intensity. So very, very high intensity down to mineral soil type conditions. So when you lose the organics, you lose the ability for the soil to retain the moisture, and it's called wasting, where it just will run off. Unfortunately, it does. So you see the little blue polygons there. Those are the outlines of each of the watersheds. Oh, thank you. I do get control of the pointer here temporarily, so hopefully I'll do this correctly. Okay. So Grizzly Flats, kind of this area here. And I want to just focus real quick. This is Sly Park, and we'll zoom in a second. This is the Camp Creek watershed, this sort of long one here. So you can see after that, actually the majority of the area until you get up to Twin Bridges was actually not too, there were pockets, but overall, not as bad as it could be. But unfortunately, the area where Camp Creek and Sly Park watershed was very significantly impacted. Okay, so now we'll just zoom in here. It gives a little bit better orientation. You can see Jacobson Lake in the upper left. See Grizzly Flats down there in that model there. And then for orientation, the highest burn severity, so if you head on North-South Road, Caps Crossing, if you have the opportunity to drive through the watershed there. So the fire moved in a northeasterly progression, north-northeast. Okay. So as you first leave Sly Park, and actually at Sly Park itself was where, because of our prior efforts, and some of it just complete honestly this spring, very, very low intensity, because that's where the backfire was started from the reservoir back away to stay the lower portions of the watershed, until you get to about Benetti Road and you start to kind of wind up that ridge. Then you come across significant pockets like this. So this is, I'm going to give you just a quick virtual windshield tour up Mormon Immigrant Trail. So this is when you get to the first burn area on the left. This is what would be the Park Creek watershed. And then in terms of what as you kind of zoom in, so you see needle cast on the bottom. So the fire went through, killed the trees, and then now all that's on the ground, just mineral soil and pine needles. So, it's just another example of needle cast there. And I've seen examples where actually a fire will go back through an area and burn the needle cast after, just amazing. So this is unfortunately pretty indicative of what we see. And then kind of looking out a little bit more, this is actually looking back into the Park Creeks. This is the upper portions of the Park Creek watershed. So you can see there are portions, even the trees that still have needles, most likely all those will die. There's not much there until you get the very upper portions of the Park Creek. The most of that, unfortunately, is burned. This is looking off to the right, Camp Creek. Most of those have just been, unfortunately, no needles left. You can see some of the prior fuel breaks of SPI right here. So we're driving up Moore Emmingen Trail. Unfortunately, a fire like this, even a 500-foot wide fuel break, unfortunately, wasn't able to stop it. And this is another area farther up Camp Creek as you're going up, and you can see SPI was actively doing salvage harvest in that area, and Forest Service is doing the same. So where it's accessible, they're trying to get any value out of the resource. And unfortunately, though, much of that area is just, that's why it's so beautiful. It's not very accessible, very steep terrain. It's just an example. So this is pretty typical what you see after fire. And you can see here, actually, this area had been thin, and that's why you see very large timber spaced out. This was intended to be able to handle wildfire, but unfortunately, the intensity it couldn't handle. And then this is as you get farther up Mormon Immigrant Trail, the very top of the Camp Creek watershed, and you've probably seen some photos and social media in the news where Forest Service is a very large, the old Iron Mountain ski resort area, and that are very large decks of just thousands and thousands of trees. So the Forest Service is going back, Jim, maybe 200-300 feet from the roads, and just getting what they can skid up to the roads. But majority of that, unfortunately, I don't know that they'll be able to get to. And typically, you have to get to these trees within about 18 months before the decomposition that they lose value. So unfortunately, most of these trees will probably just decompose in place.
Unless it's changed, and it very well be in the sense I retired, but the federal law was you cannot touch these trees for 1 year. If salvage, you can't do salvage logging for 1 year. And now it may have changed, I don't know.
I know that there are some efforts, I don't know because this is federal regulation, that doesn't apply to ours, but I know there's been efforts to expedite some of those, particularly as they relate to.
I know
proximity
SBI's been
roads.
out there.
Right.
SBI's been out there doing
Right.
their stuff.
So, but I know Forest Supervisor and the district rangers have both personally talked with me about their efforts to work interagency. I mean, this is a cross-discipline, cross-boundary effort, to restore an entire watershed. So I know they're going to do everything they can to work with
Yeah,
this.
I think most of this logging's within about 100, 150 feet from the roadways, and they're just removing hazard trees for public safety.
So obviously, I think a picture says 1,000 words here, and that the USGS actually does similar mapping. So this is in addition to that prior map I showed you, which was the Bear Map Burn Area Environment Emergency Response Map. They do debris flow mapping, and they use some algorithms that look at fire intensity, tree mortality, soil health, slopes, et cetera. And they look at the probability of landslides in the next couple years. There are several sections upstream of the Camp Creek Tunnel where there's an 80 to 100% probability of landslides. That was pretty stark. And almost, as you saw that overview, the lower half of the watershed, almost all red, about the entire lower half is 50, at least a 50% chance on average of half the watershed having landslides. And importantly, those debris flows can impact our diversion facility. We have to maintain that facility as operational. Obviously, because of the damage to the canal, and Brian M. and his staff are working expeditiously as possible to get that restored. But we realize this is our main artery right now, and that there is increased probability of extended drought into next year, and so we cannot afford to not divert water. So this is just, took a quick snapshot of that model, and so the last polygons I was showing was the boundary of the watershed. These little black dots are points along the rivers. So this little, go slowly, these dots here are all the little tributaries coming into the Camp Creek watershed. As you can see, basically the whole lower half of the watershed is 40% or greater, and there's some areas, these little dark reds, at 80 to 100% of probability. So because of the steepness of the slope, the intensity of the burn, very high likelihood in the lower half. What was also, and didn't realize until we got out there, see even in Slide Park Creek watershed at the top there, is also, the majority of that was very, very heavily burned as well. So in addition to debris flows in the tunnel, we need to prepare for debris flows coming down Park Creek as well. So we developed a response plan to deal with that. And what we do, we do get trees coming through. That's not uncommon in wet years, but these are magnitude orders, obviously different. Rather than one or two, hundreds, thousands, we don't know yet what we expect to come through. And so what we plan to do is stage an excavator at that facility. I think most board members have the opportunity to visit that facility and to keep the debris flows off that diversion to maintain the ability to continue to divert water. We currently don't actually own a full-size excavator. We've historically rented them in the past. We just haven't had a sustained long-term need for this. We did actually just rent one 2 weeks ago, for example, for the project I told you down, the big distribution line repair down in Cameron Park. So we either need to rent or potentially purchase one for this purpose, depending on the use. So we looked at rental needs. We actually first started there, and unfortunately there's not the right size equipment even today available, and that's just because the construction market right now obviously very difficult. We did find one that would probably work, a little smaller because we need to reach out to get the trees off. So this one's a little undersized, but it's about $6,500 a month. And obviously that type of equipment, once you let it go, you hold on to it because you don't know if you're going to get it back. So assuming we need it for the full 6 months, we'd spend around $40,000 over the course of the winter. And then looking at the analysis from our partners, assuming 5 years, we're approaching $200,000 in rental costs just for that project alone. And we just don't know what the availability would be. So obviously we would want to rent it as early as we can and keep it for the winter just to make sure it's available to us. So we also looked at, well, what if we were to purchase this piece of equipment? That would be about $230,000 through Sourcewell again. And Sourcewell is a 36% discount. It's pretty amazing. This is a nationwide pooling of competitive bidding. So there's literally one excavator in the entire country right now that tentatively has our name on it that's available. So we had one, and it was sold to the city of Tacoma on the East Coast, being fabricated. Yeah. So it just shows you, how we're dealing with the competitiveness of equipment, unfortunately, right now. In this case, historically, we might not actually need the opposable thumb because we're usually digging. But in this case, sort of a little bit of add-on that we would have a thumb to move those trees. So we'd add 2 different buckets depending upon the use for our field staff in the future. Fortunately, we do actually have 3 different trailers that would be, so we wouldn't need any trailer to transport this. Right. So that does include freight from the East Coast to down in Sacramento or Rancho, Greg? I can't remember down that area. So.
Don't, as a public utility or as a government agency, aren't we exempt?
No.
We're not.
I've been arguing about this for years, haven't I, Alan?
Did it change? Because I thought it was at one time
I
that
don't
we
know.
were exempt. All right.
Crazy.
Yeah, are you referring to sales tax or? Yeah, we're not exempt from sales tax. There are certain exemptions from property taxes, for example, but I'm not yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not like being wholesaler.
Yeah.
So that would be the place of sale, and I know
Right.
Jason actually, it really depends on where we can pick up. It gives us our best advantage for tax rates, and so they sort of figure that out on the back end of where we can get it, but we obviously go with the most conservative number here, depending upon where it would be available. So
Why don't we pick it up from
make a road trip
the,
out of it.
yeah, the John Deere dealer on Missouri Flat Road. and
Right.
Use it for,
Yeah. I didn't see one of those in the yard when I drove by this morning, but maybe. So. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it's not clicking ahead for me. So didn't give me control over the pointer. That's what happened. So Jen's fixing it for me real quick. Right. Is that it? There we go. Okay. So our recommended approach, and I promise I won't touch that anymore, for the reason we described, we think it's makes better business sense for the district to go ahead and propose to purchase this. We obviously have a demonstrated need for the Camp Creek Tunnel. I'm hoping, honestly, we don't need as much as our experts have advised us, but we can't be wrong. That's simple fact. And we clearly have a need for ongoing repairs and even installation projects of larger distribution lines. And then we do use excavators for doing culverts and other work up on Project 184 as well. The rental availability right now is obviously described pretty volatile, and we need to make sure our equipment will be ready when we needed it. And any delay in getting the equipment out there is going to reduce the amount of water that's available for us. So we just think it's most economic for the district's overall needs. This is a 20 to 25 year, I think Jason was saying something like that. 20-year piece of equipment. So this is a long-term investment we're asking the board to make. So next slide, please. As I described, the proposed procurement would be, and we attached that to your board packet, would be the piggyback, and that's allowed per district administrative regulation. It gives obviously a very good value, and we're not having to endure that time and effort for bidding. Okay, next slide, please. And the funding would come from the district's operation budget. It would be capitalized on the back end, but it would come from drinking water budget this year. So option one is to award a contract to Pape Machinery in the not to exceed amount of $230,000, $230,127.06 for the purchase of one 2021 John Deere 160 GLC excavator. Option two, take other action, and recommendation is option one.
Move one.
I'll second it.
thank you, Director Osborne. Thank you, Director Anzini.
And I will say this as an adjunct to that, is that if they're not available and we had to do this work by hand, it would be extremely dangerous. And getting a log jam clean, we need to have this piece of equipment.
Okay, any other board comments? I will say that in the consent calendar, we did approve to have a company assist us in the FEMA recovery. I'd like to see if we can squeeze this purchase into that FEMA proposal, because it's definitely tied to the disaster, so.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, is there any public comment?
President Dwyer, at this time, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
Okay, let's vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you very much. Moving on to action item 11. Yes, action item 11, engineering, award of a contract. Ryan.
Good morning, President Dwyer, members of the board. Brian Mueller, I'm the Director of Engineering, and this item is board consideration of 3 contracts related to the Caldor fire. Can I take that, or do you want me? Okay. So next slide. So the previous board actions, in August, the board first ratified a declaration of emergency for the fire. And then on September 13th, the board awarded a contract, a construction contract with Sybil and Reed for flumes 4, 5, and 6 replacement. So since the last board meeting, this is a little bit different than what we put in there. I got a couple changes, but the general manager has approved 2 contracts related to the fire that requires board ratification. And then we had anticipated that the tree falling contract would have been, but there's still some paperwork to be done. So we're asking the board to approve that one today and then ratify the other 2. So the first one was a ratification of a contract with GHD, which is our engineering design consultant, for $1.74 million to provide design and construction engineering support for flumes 4, 5, and 6. And then also ratify the third bullet, a contract with Aptum Environmental and Infrastructure for $150,000 for FEMA consulting services. And then the second bullet would be board approval of a contract with Left Coast Land Clearing for $109,000. So for the design and construction support contract first with GHD, obviously this is something we would typically go out with a request for proposals for a design, but we're not in that situation with this situation here. So we immediately hired GHD, which has helped us both with Flume 30 and with other emergency type of contracts and flume replacements in the past. They've got great expertise in flumes, a good track record with similar projects and emergency situations that we've been in, like the 2017 storms. So our staff had negotiated a time and materials that says construction contract, but it should be a consulting contract, not to exceed $1.74 million. So what GHD is doing is designing and working with Civil and Reed to design the access road and flume replacement components of each of those flumes, performing geotechnical studies, surveying. They've done hazardous materials testing and reporting, and then they'll also be providing general and special inspections for the project. And then when it's all finished, they would give us some as-built drawings of the completed projects. So as far as the funding request that we're asking today, if you recall, the board approved a $17 million contract with Civil and Reed last time. That included funding for that contract. Since that funding is essentially burdened with the Civil and Reed contract, we do need additional funding for design, capitalized labor, and related contracts like stormwater prevention, monitoring. Also could be some drone services that we need. So our funding request would be to fund the GHD design contract, plus additional capitalized labor and other contracts of about $600,000 for a total funding request of $2.34 million. So that is the contract, and we'll get into the other 2 a little bit later. At this point, I'd like to have Carrie Mutchler just come up and talk about the status of Flume 4, 5, and 6. Carrie's been doing a great job. About a couple months ago, he thought he was just managing one flume replacement project. That was the work this year was just supposed to be for designing some roads, but now he's managing really 4 complete replacement projects with the order to get it done ASAP. So, Carrie, come up and talk about 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, really. And then after Carrie, I'll have Brian Deason. Brian and his staff are doing a great job with the hazard tree falling efforts as well, so he'll talk about that, and then I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. Kerry Mutchler, Senior Engineer for the district. So as of right now, Flumes 4, 5, and 6, we've done the geotechnical studies. We've got 30% designs mostly on all our projects. We got the 50% designs. We'll have Flume 5 as of Wednesday. So the biggest challenge on getting this through, usually on a normal project, we have the designs in hand. We just give them to the contractor and they go for it and we manage it. This one gets complicated in that we are doing the design simultaneously. And the object is to get our designers ahead of construction on some of this so that we're not delayed on time. Time is not our friend right now. And so I'm glad to report that, yeah, we're close to being to that point where they're far enough ahead on the design that we're able to breathe a little easier on keeping SRC going. We have done some hazardous materials on this. It is the support structures to the flume. I want to make sure that's clear. It's not the wooden flumes themselves. Everything that conveys water is just pure wood. But the support structures are treated timbers. And anything that goes into treated timbers are a lot of chemicals you just don't want to burn. And so we did have significant heavy metals show up in the ash from when these flumes burned. As of this last weekend, flumes 5 and 6 are cleaned and we're set there. Flume 4 should be by the end of the week, and then we're looking probably end of the month for flume 30. The environmental company's going to they're just bouncing from one flume to the next.
We still have to, excuse me, still have to take this treated wood to a Class 1 disposal facility, and Hanford's the only one that around, I think.
Yeah, the ash is that is burned, the
Right.
actual hazardous material. If there were flumes that are actually still wood that didn't burn, we're looking into right now how that is going to be disposed of. They classify it right now as a non-hazardous hazardous waste.
Okay.
So we are still working that aspect out, but there were significant sections of the flumes that didn't burn that we had to remove. So more to come on that in the next few days, but I'm hoping that we don't have to have the EPA number for that, for the wood that we just disassembled. And,
Okay.
But the ash and all that stuff, yes, we are currently getting our EPA waste hazard number so that we can transport and dispose of this. And yes, it has to go to a specific facility. And I know of one in Stockton is the one that I know of.
The only one that I know of that'll take this stuff is in Hanford, or outside of Hanford.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it can only go, they have to take that number, and so it will be disposed of properly when we get that. We have got all the roads cut in. The flumes 4, 5, and 6. That was mostly roads, and I'll be going some slides here in a little bit. Most of that stuff was in place, but there were two roads, one going to 4, one going to 5 and 6. They're a few thousand feet long that we had to cut in, and we did work with the Forest Service and SPI to be able to get those in. Next slide. So this is just a brief overview of, thank you, what we're working with. Flume 30 sitting over right here, and then 4, 5, and 6 all on the road. This brown line is our access road. Part of it is Forest Service, part of it is SPI, and then, of course, Kyber's right there, our diversion facility. These yellow, this is, again, just a different view on a aerial map. Again, the road coming in is this purple line. This green line is the road that we cut in to 5 and 6, and this yellow line is the one that cut into 4. This is kind of what the access road kind of looks like right now. This is the existing, let's see if can we see it on the picture? I lost the mouse. Oh. I don't know if it's showing up in the picture. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that where those guys are standing, that is was the existing access road. It had grown over, but that's the one that we have restored. Again, 6 miles long and on U.S. Forest Service and Sierra Pacific Industries property. Next slide. This is what it looks like now. We've got, this is the machinery we use to get the road bladed in, and we've got a nice access road right now. We put a bare minimum amount of rock on this right now just to get everything in. If weather develops, we may have to put a little bit more in, but we're trying to, not build a highway. We're not building a highway. We're just trying to get access, get the stuff built, and then get out. This is Flume 4. This is the cut into the new access road into 4. This road is only going to be used to get certain equipment in. The plan is we can't get a concrete trucks in here, it's too steep. We're looking at somewhere between 25%, 38% grades that we're getting in through here. But we are within the distance of getting concrete slick lines in. We can be within 2,000 feet, we're 800 feet away. So we can pump concrete down to this site now. This is an example of the hazardous waste. Like I was saying, they bag it all up, they go in these big bins, and then we haul the bins to the facilities. And this is standard for all the sites, but this is what Flume 4 was looking like on the 7th, just about 5 days ago. You can see that they've cleared away a lot of that and getting ready to go. Flumes 5 and 6, pictures on side from right after the burn. Again, just a few days ago, 5 on the left, 6 on the right. Everything is either bagged and cleaned and, you know, getting ready to move in and start the actual construction process.
There are some pictures that are missing from our,
Yes, I updated this morning.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Get the,
It will be up online, though.
yeah.
Okay.
So for the access roads, this right here was the accessory road we used during the 2017 storm event. We put stuff in here to get erosion control protection. That ridge is right over here, this same ridge. So that's what got us into Flumes 5 and 6. And we just filled up the canal, as you can see with the wood. We protect what we had in place. We filled it up with dirt, and now we're able to get equipment around and through. And this one, we may actually even be able to get the concrete trucks in. This one's not as steep. It's only looking at about 15%, which is about the max that they can do. So the upcoming work, we'll finish the hazmat removal. We'll get to start with the Msc Wall Construction. We have a borrow site already located. We've got to move about 8,000 yards. The Msc walls are going to be between 3 and 20 feet plus. We shoot the new canal sections and we flow the water. It's pretty simple. What's that? It's real easy. Yeah, right? That's what he keeps telling me, so. All right.
Water update is about,
We are shooting for mid-December. We have a couple options that we will be discussing later, but that is what we're shooting for, is mid-December.
and for the board, every time I see Carrie, I ask that question, so don't feel bad.
Does that include Flume 30?
Yes, it does. Wow. Yeah, at this point, yeah. We've reworked all of Flume 30 from the design to help expedite some of that work. With the hazard or the emergency declaration, that helped with a number of things to get us in a little early. But we are, the latest schedule that I've gotten from SRC, we are showing, about mid-December for that one as well.
Great. Thank
Quick,
you.
quick question. Yeah. When we put in the new ones, we're going with concrete troughs, but what's the superstructure going to be? Are we doing treated wood again? Are we going to do steel?
Okay, so well, I guess I should go into more detail with that. Currently on Flume 4, in order to meet the deadline for mid-December, we would have to repair the wood superstructure into 4 and then do concrete from around the spillway out. If we go with a full concrete replacement, that takes us somewhere into the part of middle of January. That MSC wall for the superstructure is difficult. And, that's the 20-plus feet height. With the road that we're going in, though, and the design, we have the ability to come in at a later date. The roadways are going to be, the bench on that is going to be the U-shaped canal that we've done in 38, 40, and 44. And we have enough bench that we would be able to come in at a later date to be able to get that. Flume 30 is also being converted to a U-shaped canal. Most of that is to mitigate some of the hazard the fire has caused with rock fall and tree fall. It's easier to put that stuff in than to get the prefabbed flume sections that we were planning on doing with that. So that is a new design that GHD is currently working on with Flume 30, is redoing that design and the alignments so that it's a little bit quicker construction to mitigate all that.
So the answer to your question is going to be all earth. It's not going to be wood substructures or any of that, except for possibly we're meeting after this board meeting to evaluate that. Part of the concern is how much water is going to be in the river at what time on a historical basis and a drought year basis that we could gain in diverting and putting into Slide Park to replace a lot of the water we used through this drought. So more to come on that. It's staff and the board all want to go back in concrete.
Yeah, but it's a race.
But it's a race with time and water and how much we can backfill Slide Park if there's another critically dry year.
I don't get to, okay. Good morning, members of the board. Brian Deason, Environmental Resources Supervisor for the district. And I'm here today to present information about board authorizing a contract, awarding a contract for hazard tree falling. So as Brian mentioned, this has changed slightly from when the original packet went out. So yet another consequence of the Caldor fire is fire-damaged hazard trees. There's potential for these trees. They threaten not only staff and public safety, they also threaten to further damage our facilities. Next slide, please. So what do we do to address this risk? The district has contracted with registered professional foresters who are conducting surveys along the canal. We're focusing our initial efforts along the El Dorado Canal, approximately 5 miles of the canal between the diversion dam and flumes 39 and 40. But there's other areas of the district where we'll also be looking at doing hazard tree removal. So this is a pretty large task, so we're kind of dividing the work up into segments, and we are releasing a series of requests for bids to help implement this work. Next slide. Thank you. So this graphic is just meant to kind of illustrate the scale of the work that we have ahead of us, just to help everyone orient. Over there. Okay. I'll use words to describe. So on the right side of the map is the Kybers Diversion Dam. On the left side of the map roughly is kind of Riverton area where Ice House Road comes off Highway 50. The red line is Highway 50, of course, and the pink shaded area is the extent of the Caldor fire. Also put on here, just for reference from Carrie's previous slides, where Flume 30 and where Flumes 4, 5, and 6 are located. So we've partitioned these reaches out. You can see there's roughly 8 segments up here. We anticipate probably combining some of these segments as we go out. It's somewhat dependent on the number of trees that are actually surveyed. And if you observe to the right side of the map, there's the 2 segments of light blue lines there. That's the area for tree falling that we're going to focus on today. So if you advance to the next slide. It's in the middle. All right. Oh, thank you. So these two areas, this is just a zoomed-in area of those two blue segments from the previous slide. The diversion dam is over here on the right. There's flume 1, flume 2, flume 4 is over here at the left side of the screen. These pink shaded areas are areas for removal or for falling of hazard trees. And within this first segment alone, we've identified approximately 550 hazard trees that need to be felled. So, so we issued an RFB in mid-September for the hazard tree falling in this segment. You can see we had a good turnout in terms of bids. We had 13 contractors who attended an optional site visit to walk the length of the treatment areas. We did end up receiving, from those 13, we received 10 bids. You can see there's quite a range here, though, in the bids that we received. So from roughly 110,000 to 1.2 million. I think this is just indicative of the demand for these services right now. So we did determine that Left Coast Land Clearing was the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. We had our third-party independent review done by our registered professional foresters and agreed that their bid was reasonable and that they could perform the work. They're based out of Sonora, and they've done hazard tree removal for Tuolumne County, Tuolumne Utilities District, and even the El Dorado Resource Conservation District. So we're quite confident that they can perform the work. In structuring our RFB, we also, and thank you we're sure to meet all of the FEMA requirements for competitive bidding so that we can seek reimbursement for these hazard tree falling activities. And so I'd like to recognize Ryan Deakeen in finance, Elizabeth Leeper in legal, and Doug Venable in environmental review for their efforts to put together this RFB. No? I shouldn't have control. So how do we get this work done? What happens once the contract is in place? The forester has measured and marked the trees by size class. So that's no small task either. In particular, in this first reach, these are very steep slopes. There's lots of ash on the ground. It's very challenging just to even access these trees. But they've identified those trees that they feel need to be felled. They've marked them by size class. The loggers will go out, follow these trees in place. We're going to do the best we can to position these to help maximize slope stability and also to avoid, have a controlled felling operation so we don't further damage our facility. The forester will then verify all the trees that have been cut by size class, and that's how we'll make payment to the contractor, is on a per tree basis. Next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of our schedule, so we're doing several concurrent activities here. We're surveying, we're bidding, we're implementing for each of these different segments. So trying to be as efficient as we can. This is the first contract that we're asking to award. We currently have a second one out for bid, which sealed bids are due on the 15th. And then we'll be issuing a subsequent RFB in the coming weeks for these various segments. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Just one last. So one thing I wanted to mention is when we get to the option table, you'll find that we're recommending option 2. The only difference there is that we're asking the board to approve this contract as opposed to ratifying the contract. We had thought we would have it in place late last week. We're still finalizing submittals. We'll likely have that contract ready to sign today or tomorrow. The contractor is prepared to start work this week.
I'll be curious to see with the subsequent bids, because now that the first one is done and now that's public information, how that affects the subsequent bids. Do the low bidders go, well, I should have put a little more in, and the high bidders go, well, okay, I'll bring it down a little bit. Hopefully, it's a little more compact.
Yes, but just a footnote to that, as these contracts are bid out and we have the bids, I plan to authorize those and bring them back to the board for ratifications, so there's no delays.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So the third contract is a ratification for FEMA consulting services. And this is a contract that Jim signed with a company called Aptum Environmental Infrastructure. It was a cost of $150,000 not to exceed. And the contract was for a 60-day time period to allow us to some time to solicit proposals for more long-term assistance. FEMA guidelines allow a 60-day initial contract, but in order to be reimbursed for the full amount, we would go out with a subsequent RFP for a more longer-term contract. So the scope of services would be consulting, policy guidance, program management for potential funding and reimbursements under three primary areas: FEMA Public Assistance Program, the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program, and then the state California Disaster Assistance funding potential via the state board. So we're asking the board to ratify that initial contract of $150,000, and then staff will be coming back in November for a longer-term contract award to help us navigate through the FEMA process with this fire. Next slide. So this was the board options as presented in the packet, and then maybe we just go to the next slide. Our recommendation is option 2. So we've changed that, as Brian mentioned. So the first bullet there would be to ratify contracts with GHD in the not to exceed amount of $1.74 million for engineering design and construction support for flumes 4, 5, and 6, and also ratify the contract with Aptum in the not to exceed amount of $150,000 for FEMA consulting services, and approve additional funding of $600,000 for our staff capitalized labor and additional contract services for a total funding request of $2.34 million for flumes 4, 5, and 6 replacement. And then the second bullet would be to approve a contract with Left Coast Land Clearing in the not to exceed amount of $109,815.72 for the hazard tree falling services along the El Dorado Canal. This is the phase from the diversion facility to Flume 4. And our recommendation is option 2.
Question, I don't know that we've ever used a FEMA consultant before, and I may be dead wrong, but would that be reimbursable under the FEMA guidelines to get some expert help?
Yeah, so I think both, this initial contract and the long-term contract would all be reimbursable by FEMA.
Yeah, and I think we've got this lead. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
So what we're allowed is a 5% management fee, or kind of administrative fee. We expect that this contract and potentially a subsequent contract will be covered under that 5%. We're still aiming at receiving a lot of insurance proceeds. We just have to kind of figure out who will reimburse us for what at this moment still.
No, we reached out to the Paradise guys that had that fire up there, and they used this firm, and it was highly recommended.
Move to.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Osborne, Director Anzini. Any board comments? I'll just say a couple of things. One is, I remember how hard we struggled with the FEMA reimbursement from the last disaster and how our internal staff, for the lack of a better term, was put through the ringer, the paperwork ringer. So I think it's a good thing to use this consultant to supplement our own in-house expertise. The other one, Left Coast Land Clearing, I noticed that they listed Mark Egbert from the Resources Conservation District as a reference. And so I'm sure you checked with him, and he said, yeah, they're a good company, so that's good news. Okay, so any other board comments? Any public comment? Oops,
Well,
sorry.
just one, just that all that we're going through today and the coming months and next few years, it's very painful. Like, we'll be in great shape when we get out of it with a lot of these forced things, but it's tough right now.
And I'm sure the board is saying, these are large numbers, and they are, and we're doing everything we can to pursue cost recovery through the insurance company first. Some of this work that is slope stabilization and tree falling to prevent future hazards, the insurance company probably would not be considering paying that because it's not a loss, but it's certainly something that we're going to be pursuing with FEMA. So I believe a lot of this will be covered either by the insurance or FEMA. But you're right, FEMA is extremely difficult to go through.
Okay, haven't heard that. Is there any public comment on this item?
It does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
Thank you. Okay, please vote. Push your button, George.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Okay, thank you all very much. I'd like to propose a 5-minute comfort break and reconvene at, what time do you have, Jennifer?
It's 11:17, we'll say 11:25.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Okay, reconvene the board meeting, and we'll address action item number 12, Reservoir 2 tank. And I see we have some show and tell.
We like it.
Yeah, we don't like it
We
either.
like the show and tell feature.
Good morning, Board. Patrick Wilson, Senior Civil Engineer. Today, presenting on the Reservoir 2 Way Recoding Project, contract amendment for construction and inspection services. So previous board action, in July 20, board awarded a contract to Advanced Industrial Services for tank recoding, as well as NCS inspection for specialty coating inspection. In November of 20, the board adopted the 2021 operating budget. And then January 2021, the board approved the contract for additional NCS inspection specialty coating services. Slide, please. So with the completion of Reservoir 2A and moving into Reservoir 2, there was extensive structural replacement that was found, which we'll get into in a little bit, as you can see in front of you. Due to the limited inspection of initial coating within that reservoir in comparison to Reservoir 2A. And in addition, we're in need of funding for continued inspection, both construction as well as especially painting inspection. Next slide, please. So Reservoir 2 structural replacement, we'll get into this in more detail as I go forward through this, but in short, we're in need of replacing all 36 inner rafters 72 middle rafters, 108 outer rafters, 215 earthquake straps in between all the rafters. And the roof from the knuckle up, which I'll get into some of the explanation of that in a little bit, as well as extending the project approximately 3 months to complete this additional work. Next slide, please. So this is just a photo that I have that just showing the external coating. Unlike Reservoir 2A, which, if you might recall, had some paint blistering that was occurring, it had some white underneath the green. This tank externally looked in much better shape than Reservoir 2A, but unfortunately, as we found out, the inside is in much worse shape. Next slide, please. So it's going to be a bit of a theme in this, but the blistering of the paint is exceptionally challenging in Reservoir 2. In fact, to the point where it's hands down the worst tank that I've ever seen. Reservoir 2, so the cupola is in the middle. Basically, that holds up the entire substructure of the inner rafters from there to the girders. You can see the darkened black color, which I brought a few pieces of that in as well. That's actually roof that's desponded from the rest of the steel structure. So just for reference, the roof itself is 3/16 inch steel thickness. And that's about a 1/16 of an inch steel that's already completely desponded from the roof. That's in every dark location that you can see in that drawing, in that photo. One other note I'd like to make, the handholds, which are 2 to the top of the photo and 2 to the bottom, have been removed. That's for the cathodic protection. But as you look more towards the middle of the cupola, obviously the cupola is off, and it's a little bit difficult to see. You can see daylight coming through the actual roof itself as you look around, yeah. And that's actually pinholes, which we'll get into in a little bit, and some much larger than pinholes that are actually completely open to the atmosphere on that tank roof. Next slide, please. So as I kind of started on, the roof corrosion is very extensive. You know, as those, so focusing on the photo for a second, the very dark black is completely desponded, and the kind of off hue orange color, more rust color obviously, that's actually getting ready to despond on this tank. As I touched many of those on the lift, it was falling off in pieces onto the floor. So the vast majority of the roof has failed. In fact, I would say over 80% of it, just from lack of coating, and also really a corrosive environment from the way we used to operate our systems, but really the coating failure is the predominant fault. And on that photo, I kind of want to touch on this as well. The rafters themselves, and this was a big deal in Reservoir 2A as well, they had pre-drilled holes drilled through the I-beams. And unfortunately, that's a point of initial corrosion. No matter how hard you try, no matter what product you use, that's a conceivable point where corrosion can begin. In this tank in particular, those locations and beyond the location where they're actually a bolted connection, each one of those could be honed out with a simple pencil or a knife and continue to make that hole bigger and bigger. There's not much holding those steel I-beams in that roof together in this tank anymore. With the future of this tank and the replacement, clearly we will not have any drilled holes in this tank, and I'll get to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Next slide, please. So I obviously have some examples physically in person if anybody wants to take a look at them, but some of these were on the floor that size, so they'd actually fallen off the roof, you know, during the time of use. Beyond that, we obviously started knocking more and more off as we started to begin work. But that was one that when the tank was brought offline and we made our first initial inspection that we found that was by and large the largest one we've seen. Next slide, please. So in addition to the rafters themselves, which are running on top, the girders unfortunately have sustained significant damage as well, to the point of needing full replacement in this tank. They're often called bay beams. That may be a nomenclature thing if you've heard of that. Nonetheless, the girders themselves were a significant point of corrosion. In short, with the bolted connections, as we saw in Reservoir 2 that I brought in, where that roof rafter makes connection to that girder is an initial point of corrosion. No matter what we do, we can't completely stop. With the replacement of these girders and the rafters themselves, that will be a welded connection, which will negate that potential need for corrosion. Additionally, and we'll get into another photo in a little bit, The rafter clips and can be seen on one of the girders that I brought, one of the rafters I brought in. Almost all failed in this tank. So the rafter clip itself creates an airspace between the girder to allow that to dry out and to ventilate. What happens when that rafter slams down on top of it, not only does it damage the coating, scratches it right off, but it also creates an entire corrosion cell in and of itself. And that was a significant problem in this tank in comparison to Reservoir 2A. The girders themselves were holding up almost every rafter in that tank, and the clips were non-existent. They were gone. Next slide, please.
Patrick, I'm not sure was the construction different in tank 2A than tank 2?
Unfortunately, no. The big difference is between the coating of tank 2 and 2A, the coating contractor actually died. He crashed his plane in the Sierras, and the company just got in and got out. And so the coating on Reservoir 2 was done very hastily. Additionally, inspection was limited at that time. We didn't have a full-time coating inspector on site. They kind of did stop-in checks. And so they slammed it out, got in and got out. And so that's a significant difference, is we actually had an ownership individual who was there for the initial, was correct. So the most important part of this photo is the knife, because it survived a retirement.
Yeah, I think that's the same knife you used the
It
last
is.
time.
It
Okay.
is. But my inspector retired. So nonetheless, this is actually a shot of the girder itself, and you can see the delamination of the actual I-beam, and that's a really significant problem. In fact, that's, of the webbing and the I-beam itself, that's the displacement of the loading onto the I-beam. And as that starts to fan out like that, you lose structural integrity and you risk the chance of full failure. Clearly, we're not there, but we would be headed that way if we continue to leave this tank in service. And what's really missing in this photo, just above the knife and to the rafter itself, is the rafter clip. It's completely missing. In fact, the bolts, you can see just the hair of the nut of the bolt grinding its way on that girder, which more than likely led to the significant delamination and corrosion on the girder itself. Just scratching away that coating as the tank flexes throughout the day between fill cycles, between temperature changes. It's a constant moving structure. So as that continued to scratch its way through, corrosion occurred, and in a wet environment just made it even worse. Next slide, please. So I kind of spoke a little bit about bolted connections. This is really indicative of what we ran into in Reservoir 2A as well. And we actually were able to rectify this in that tank, unlike this. Reservoir 2A and 2 itself had a bolted connection for the earthquake straps. So between the roof rafters as they run, to keep them in place if there was ever an earthquake, there's a strap that runs in between those two rafters. As part of that, the coating rubs off. It's not welded. It's a bolted connection, as I kind of mentioned earlier. And this is really deterministic of the entire tank. We found in almost every single rafter connection that circular hole, earthquake strap connection. The circular hole was pre-drilled, but that secondary hole, almost every rafter had some form of a hole almost adjacent to where the earthquake strap was located. Again, it's a corrosion point, and it's something that inner webbing, which is your structural integrity of that I-beam, is diminished substantially. And that, unfortunately, is not really repairable without significant welding. And the cost of doing the welding far exceeds replacing an I-beam. Next slide, please. So another big challenge that's within this tank and forced us into a full replacement of the roof rafters was actually the knife edging that occurred. So we've had, obviously, metal loss in this photo, and this has actually been blasted. That's why it's in more of a gray color itself, not a rust color. That knife edge is impossible to coat. No matter what paint suppliers say, no matter what product they're pushing, you can't do it. In fact, the new tank designs today, the I-beams themselves are completely rolled. These are all chamfered I-beams, so they have a little bit of an edge to them. All the new tanks today and the new steel we put in will all be rolled on that I-beam. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's a perfect environment, because it's not ever going to be fully coated properly. It's very much a challenge with any I-beam, but it's going to be significantly better than this. And with that knife edge being as straight as it is, and the lower I-beam that I brought in today, rafter I brought in today, shows it very clearly of how jagged and how rough that can get. In Reservoir 2A, we had maybe 20 of these that we left that were in this general condition, maybe a maximum of 30. We were able to coat with a very solid state, meaning that we were able to get a good coating on it, so we were able to leave them. In Reservoir 2, they are so jagged on both sides, not just the side that we blasted, but obviously the other side of that I-beam, that they are virtually uncoatable to be able to extend the useful life of those rafters. Next slide, please. So again, the rafter clip is missing in this photo, and the real reason I showed this photo, aside from the knife, of course, is also the girder and the delamination there, which is amazing that it was actually bent. It's almost bending the girder in a way from all the stress and loading that's taken, not just from the roof, but the added loading of the rafter moving back and forth, as I mentioned with thermal expansion. Next slide, please. And then we got into the roof. As if the girders weren't enough, the rafters weren't enough. We started doing some initial inspection blasting, and as we did it throughout the day, we were probably three to 4 days into it, and we started basically every panel we touched, we were punching holes through it, just doing inspection blasting. Just the same blasting that they would do, frankly, for preparing it to paint. It's more or less, it's certain areas that we think are possible limitations for being able to repair or maybe to coat. We have them go in and we spot check, and with our coating inspector, we point out areas and they attack them. Unfortunately, as we got into this, we started to realize something even more significant than we hadn't noticed with the rafters up to this point. Next slide, please. As the holes continued to increase and also to increase in size, next slide, please. We started to become very leery of what actually occurred with the initial coating. Reservoir 2A, just to fall back in time a little bit, received a top but a very thin layer of coating on top of the rafters. So basically sandwiched between the roof and the top of the rafter, there was coating not only on the roof, but also on the rafter. What we very quickly realized, next slide please, is that there was no coating. It was a shop primer red, actually, which is what they ship from Chicago Bridge and Iron to wherever they're building the structure. And unfortunately, as we got further and further into it, every single rafter that we removed and we blasted underneath, that exact hole, or if not bigger, occurred in every single roof sheet that we had. So not only from the photos before that you may have seen, because we were working in between to start with, and we were blasting, we were showing you basically in between the rafters, that was actually not the worst part of it. We didn't do a UT thickness on this. I don't really think it's necessary on the roof, because very clearly from the pieces of the roof that I had missing, we're well over a 16th gone. In addition to trying to patch this is insurmountable. The challenge with patching it, patching just a single hole in it is one thing. Patching numerous holes is a whole other conversation, because unfortunately there will be no lap weld on the inside and the outside that'll be able to prevent corrosion. You'd have to cut in a sheet, cut out a portion, weld inside, weld out. By the time you do that, by the time you factor in all the material labor, and frankly getting the steel is as challenging in and of itself in that size as in the smaller sheets, and even cutting it on the site is a very expensive cost. It doesn't really give us a great product moving forward, something we're able to coat and to put quality to and be able to make another 50, 60, 100 years out of whatever we touch. Next slide, please. So as part of this, clearly we need some Reservoir 2 coating inspection work. MCS has been working closely with the district up to this point. If you recall, we've done a little bit of a construction grouping with them from the steel installation side of it, as well as the painting inspection because of their background. It's been immensely helpful for the district to have them on board with us. Their expertise has gone way above and beyond what we anticipated with this project, excuse me. But because of that coating inspection, it's going to allow us to extend the life of both of these facilities, not just 2A and replacement of the roof itself at Reservoir 2, but it's also going to speak volumes in 15 years when we actually take this tank offline to do a physical inspection and to do, hopefully, at that time, a recoating. These paints, as I'll get into, the low volatile organic compound paints, They were never really designed to make it 15 to 20 years. They were a first attempt. If you remember around that time in the early 2000s when we had 11 of our 34 tanks built, the challenge there was there was NSF rule at that time, and paint manufacturers were scrambling. So we unfortunately inherited a really bad batch of paint, politely put, with limited inspection, really kind of KO'd a lot of the challenges that we've had at this particular tank and others that the district owns. With the recoating of this tank and the new paints that have been proven, certainly over the last decade, within 15 to 20 years, we should see a tank much like we did at Bass Lake. If you guys may remember, we actually did a recoating project. In fact, we'll be doing this second tank next year. I had 0 structural replacement in there. Not a single piece of metal was replaced. That was at the tail end of this low organic compounds 2005 timeframe for Bass Lake tank number 1, 2007-8 for the second tank. Those were at the tail end, but the early 2000s were really subjected to these really poor paints. And finally, the future work, as I've been mentioning at Reservoir 2-2A moving forward, once this project is complete, should only ever be recoating. There may be some minor structural steel we have to do in Reservoir 2A because of stuff we skipped over, because maybe it wasn't time for it yet. But in the end, it's going to be far less than what we're doing today, and certainly less than Reservoir 2. Next slide, please.
Patrick, the last time these were coated and we had the issue with the contractor, was there an outside inspection service that we used on those as well?
Which one are you speaking to?
When we had done this 15 years ago or whenever, and the contractor passed away, and were we using an outside coating inspector? And it sounds like they didn't.
They weren't full-time. So back in that time frame, coating inspection was certainly not what it is today. We have somebody out there the entire time they're painting. Because the big challenge back then was the preparation of the site beforehand. So each day you have your dehumidification equipment, you have all your blasting equipment, you have your painting equipment. That wasn't necessarily checked to the extent that it is today. And that's one of the big differences in time that we've made. Certainly that cost of inspection is really finite if you look at the grand scale of the project, but it is something that we can't live without moving forward. I can't tell you how many times we've had coating inspectors catch things on projects, not just MCS, but other coating inspectors that we've had, catch things on projects that even the contractor missed. And so that added bit of detail is invaluable for the district moving forward. Again, it's a really small cost, really in the grand scheme of certainly this project, but even on the smaller projects, it's worth every penny because capturing and finding the problems beforehand alleviates this issue in the long term. Yeah, absolutely. So as part of this project, we're kind of breaking this into twofold, and that's part of the change order that is in front of you today. We're going to capitalize all the steel replacement work within Reservoir 2 itself, which includes the replacement of all 36 inner rafters, which is included in change order number 6, as well as bid item number 17. Because if you remember, in a handful in Reservoir 2A, that required replacement of inner rafters and some other middle and outer rafters. We had bid items for that. We'll capitalize the remaining 6 inner bay beams, middle bay beams on number 18. And number 19, outer bay beam, inner and outer, no, my apologies. Bid item number 18 is the inner bay beams, those are the girders, my apologies. Bid number 19, the 12 outer girders or bay beams. We're also going to include a welding inspection because replacing that roof isn't in one foul swoop. It's going to be in sheets just the same way that it is today. The difference is substantial, though. That welding will be both inside and out. So one of the challenges that we did have at both tanks, not just Reservoir 2, is the actual lap of the sheets themselves. So there was an overlap, and they welded. They only welded mostly on the outside on those. So we have a lot of locations in Reservoir 2A that the contractor actually went in and welded up the inside of those the inside of the roof to close up that potential point of corrosion. The new sheets themselves will be done both welded inside and outside. Because of that amount of heat and the tolerances of those steel, we're going to have welding inspection out there to spot check, and really they can come in every couple of days and do their dye tests, their penetrant tests, and make a decision on if the weld's good or bad or if they need to redo it. Additionally, we'll have construction inspection from MCS for the replacement of the steel itself. And I want to talk about the project contingency for a second. So I got an estimate from Advanced Industrial Services to replace 72 middle rafters, the 108 middle outer rafters, 215 earthquake straps, the entire roof, and 4 shell stiffeners, which I'll speak about in a second. Project contingency is really solely based on paying for the steel, to be honest. One of the big challenges that we've had is that quote was over a month old. Steel has gone up twice since I got that quote. I don't think that contingency is going to be short. I think that we should be able to procure all that material in time with the amount of money that we have there. But I just want to make everyone aware that steel has gone up significantly. That's just part of this project. You know, the timing of it unfortunately didn't work out with the fire. I would have liked to have been here over a month ago, but that's how it goes. One thing I wanted to speak about is the shell stiffeners. So the ring of the tank itself, over time, it became stressed as that roof continued to fall in on itself and work itself over on top of the girders through the rafters. It actually stressed the outside of that shell. In 4 locations, we found that we're going to have to actually add, they call them wetting bands. I'm not really a fan of that, but nonetheless, basically it's a stiffener that is concave with the tank that will actually bring the shell itself back into round. So what's happened is it's basically folding in and it pulled the loosest metal it could into itself. So we have 4 locations that once we replace the roof, we're going to fall back and validate that they actually need to be replaced with a shell stiffener. We may end up with 2 or 3, hopefully, but we're hoping to get the tank actually round again. So that's the shell stiffener part of that. Additionally, we're still going to leave the paint inspection separate as an operational budget as it was originally forecasted. This is still technically a maintenance item. And that cost is $101,778. Next slide, please. And board option is to approve contract amendment for Advanced Industrial Solutions, the not to exceed amount of $2,047,106 for steel roof and rafter replacement, and MCS inspection of the not to exceed amount of $166,201 for general inspection of Reservoir 2 steel replacement and specialty coating inspection, and authorized funding of $473,590 for associated rafter replacement, and specialty welding for a full funding request of $2,585,119. Option 1. Questions?
In deference to spending $2.6 million, was there any thought at all about just replacing this tank with a concrete tank and what the cost would be with that? I mean, I'm not suggesting we should do that, but I just think, did we explore that possibility?
Absolutely. So there's some limitations there, Director Osborne. We looked at 2 other alternatives. One alternative was to go back with aluminum dome, which has been very successful and a proven industry method. In fact, we did that at Reservoir 3.
Jiffy Pop.
Jiffy Pop, yes, that's accurate. Geodesic dome, anyone? No, okay. We did examine that as an option. That was actually the first option we went towards because of the shell itself, other than those 4 stiffeners, is actually in great shape. And the floor is in great shape. So trying to save the structure that we had. Unfortunately, with the cost of aluminum, the timing in getting that aluminum here so that we can have the tank back in service, because it is a challenge only having 1 tank. If you remember, Reservoir 2 kind of feeds the head of the dragon. It feeds EDM 1 and EDM 2. And that's your collection point for Reservoir A and Reservoir 1 water treatment plants. When Reservoir 1 goes into backwash, it's a challenge for Reservoir A to get enough water in there with only 5.75 million gallons to utilize. I know that sounds strange, but it is very much a difficulty that we are faced in the summer. It was very difficult during the fire situations, everything going on this year. But that all aside, trying to get the tank back in service by May, the cost of just doing the aluminum dome, irrespective of the actual labor intensive side of it, we're looking at about $3.5 million plus the labor just to get the aluminum dome in. So that option, unfortunately, the timing is not going to work out to jump in line in that process. As far as the concrete tank goes, absolutely. Would love to replace it. However, concrete has come a long way in terms of price. The pre-stressed tanks that we have at Reservoir 12, basically making an identical but a slightly larger one at this site, it would be the dream of mine. Unfortunately, the cost of that is going to be a bit of a challenge. It is slightly cheaper than steel right now for a new tank, but you're looking at about $3 to $4 a gallon with a concrete tank plus the site work that would be needed to foundation work that would need to be done in advance of that. So the replacement of that is significantly higher. But I would caution to say this. The plan moving forward with replacing this roof, replacing the rafters, minimizing the points of corrosion, and doing everything necessary to extend the life of the rest of the structure should not, ever be an issue from a recoating standpoint. As long as we maintain a pattern and we're able to replace coating within 15 to 20 years in that time frame, and we do normalized inspections as we've been doing, we should be able to capture this before it gets to this point moving forward. The big struggle is that it's not just Reservoir 2, and I don't want to be a doomsdayer, but I said 11 to 34 other tanks. I have touched 4 of those, Bob Rice touched 3 of them, so we still have a handful left. And with that being said, we still have some very difficult tanks that we're going to have to move forward with and make decisions on that are a little bit more challenging in terms of geography, but will need to be even further reviewed on a concrete basis. From an operational standpoint and from an ownership standpoint, I truthfully believe this is the most cost-effective way moving forward for Reservoir 2. And I completely agree. I wish all of our tanks were concrete. I wouldn't even be here today talking to you about this. Okay, you don't need a drinking water engineer. Just move on.
Well, Alan's gonna hold you to this 15 years because he'll still be around.
You probably will.
Okay,
And that's my 2 cents.
maybe the right answer is just get a different engineer on this.
That's the right.
No.
Thank you.
No.
It was a pleasure, Pat.
No. Thank you for your dedication. We have to call you
And your sense of humor.
the tank guy. Okay,
I'll move option 1.
thank you very much,
And I'll
Director
second
Day.
it.
Thank you, Director Anzini. Any other board comments or smart wisecracks?
Yes, I am a smart icer. I appreciate all this because I personally am going through rebuilding a deck, and I see all that rust and everything. I'm looking under my deck, and I saw dry rot, and I've already replaced 4 beams. So I understand, even on a personal level, the importance of the maintenance. But, really, this is 5 million gallons of water that we store?
5.75.
Yeah. And so
Times
it's
2.
very important that we take care of it.
Thank you. Any other board comment? Any public comment on this item?
It does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 12.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Patrick, for good presentation. Please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you. We'll now address action item 13.
Is it still morning? Barely. Good morning.
Yeah.
President Dwyer, members of the board, I'm Allison Costa, Senior HR Analyst. Right. So, next slide, please. I'm here today to address a temporary services contract. Previous board action occurred in September of 2018, where the board awarded a 3-year contract to Blue Ribbon Personnel Services, MJT Enterprises. That current temporary services contract expires at the end of this month, September 31st, 2021. The district uses temporary employees to meet the demands of peak workloads for employee absences, say FMLA leaves, special projects, and seasonal recreational employees are about 3/4 of this demand. Also, hydro shutdown when we're doing the shutdown during this time period in the last quarter of each year. In preparation for the current contract's expiration, a request for proposals was posted on the EID website, and a mass email notification went out to approximately 600 participants. We did receive 8 responsible and responsive bids, and we did, during the bid time period, we did grant 1 extension from August 23rd to the 27th due to the Caldor fire, so that we were able to give it a few extra days in order for folks to respond. Those responsible bidders, the 8 responsive bidders that came in from all over the country, from Virginia to Florida to Texas and Southern California. The most expensive bid came from one of the bidders from Sacramento at $781,500. Human Resources and Purchasing staff did review all of the proposals based upon qualifications and experience, their customer service, proposed total hourly rates, quality of performance, and the ability to staff remote locations within the district's boundaries. Based on those criteria, Blue Ribbon's proposal was the second lowest cost at $618,052. I want to stress that this is the maximum amount that we would allocate. Each time a request to fill is done for any temporary services employee, it has to be justified by senior staff, and Mr. Abercrombie approves it before it ever a position gets placed as a temporary service person. All of the other bidders were more expensive. The least expensive, bidder came in at 618, 700, is it on here? I'm sorry. The least expensive was a agency out of Virginia, and their most closest office was in Los Angeles, and they do everything online. They do take the applications online, they do all the pre-employment online. They don't have any in-person capability in Northern California that I was able to ascertain. Based on Blue Ribbon's long-term partnership with the district, which is longer than 10 years, their local presence, their keen understanding of the local labor markets, and their track record of providing similar services not only to the district but to Nevada Irrigation District, Tahoe Public Utility District, and Marshall Medical, the district. Thank you. We would recommend that we grant this contract to Blue Ribbon. In perspective, the prior year's actual costs for 2019, 2020, and thus far this year in 2021, you see here. The previous not to exceed amount was $550,000. So you can see that we haven't gotten anywhere near the do not exceed amount in previous years. And obviously in 2021, we also haven't, because we haven't utilized a lot of the temporary services folks they were released during the Caldor fire from Recreation. We just haven't had to utilize their services to the extent. We've also been doing some internal limited term placements where district HR has been hiring folks for limited term positions. We're trying to staff certain positions internally as opposed to using the external resources that we have.
Isn't that because of the wage, or was it related to that?
I think it's a combination of things, yes. With construction and maintenance positions,
Pipeline project.
Yeah, we had to, right.
we're concentrating doing those recruitments inside, and we're doing
Because there will be a gap on the top, so moving those people in, and eventually they know the ropes, and then they can become permanent.
good pipeline for us for
Yes.
future potential permanent employees who we've spent time and effort to train.
to the district way of doing things. So yes, it was a win-win situation, we felt, to go to internal recruitments for those temporary employees. Okay, so based on the district's need for temporary employee services and new contract terms, our longstanding partnership and Blue Ribbon's expertise in the local market, this contract best meets the district's temporary employee and payrolling needs. So we do propose option 1, award a contract to Blue Ribbon Personnel Services, MJT Enterprises, in the not-to-exceed amount of $618,052 annually, effective November 1st of this year and through October 31st of 2024. Option 1 is our suggestion, and do you have any other questions?
I'll move option 1.
Second.
Thank you, Director Day. Thank you, Director Osborne. Any board comments?
Yes.
Director Anzini?
I will be voting against this, based on our previous, our legal staff having to intervene and work on a problem that this particular agency caused. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed that we're asking for another 3-year. I would support a 6 months so that we can go back out in the springtime and relook at this, but I will be voting no.
Thank you. Any other board comment?
Well, having been around this block a little while, we've had a long-standing relationship with Blue Ribbon. They've always been responsive to the district's needs, and it's not a constant thing, it's a fluid thing. There's things that change constantly. And I know this company responds well to whatever the management looks for, so I strongly support it.
Thank you.
I'd like to just make a comment. Blue Ribbon did not cause that issue. When we hired Blue Ribbon, and I'm looking at Jose if he wants to come up and save me, we give them the rates that we want to pay for those folks, and they seek out the applicants that we will be utilizing. The law changed and required us to pay prevailing wage for construction type work. So Blue Ribbon was not the cause of that issue. Jose, was I accurate enough?
I believe so, Jim. Based on my understanding, here's what resulted. It took a lot of agencies by surprise. In fact, we had a lot of interest when this first came up that a labor organization challenged this issue. A lot of neighboring agencies wanted to know, hey, what's going to happen here at EID, because it was new to them as well. And so I would agree that it caught Blue Ribbon by surprise as it caught us, and it caught the interest of a lot of other utility agencies that utilize temporary staffing services. And I will say that the district, at least in my opinion, did the best it could under the circumstances to pivot away and mitigate or eliminate that risk from occurring in the future. And again, it was just something that I don't think anybody could have anticipated.
I would disagree with you on that one because prevailing wages has been working in California for decades. So this small organization should have known.
I think the nuance there, as I understand it, was that the use of its own forces versus temporary staffing services, our contention that by virtue of using a temporary staffing service, that was the nuance there. So yes, while I acknowledge that prevailing wage issues or laws have been in place for a long, long time, this was an open legal question that that was resolved by this case.
Thank you, Jose. Any other board comments? Is there any public comment on this item?
There does not appear to be any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 13.
Okay, thank you. Board members, please vote.
Division 1, 2, and 5 voting aye. Division 4 voting no. Motion carries.
Thank you all very much. Moving on to item 14, finally. Contracting for a new auditor.
Well, hold on, we have a tradition when Tony's coming up. Should I? No. Move one. But unless you want to talk about it.
No. Because what are we going to do? You know?
PowerPoint is very, very clear. Yes, it is.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve Mays and Associates as our new audit agency. Any board comments?
Fine presentation.
I guess I'll say that in reviewing their proposal, it looked like several of their principals had worked with us before and had experience with EID. So I think it's probably a good choice.
Yeah, and I just think our new program of changing every 3 years and avoiding the perpetual continuation is a good idea, and we should continue that.
Good, okay. Thank you. Any public comment on this item?
There does not appear to be any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 14.
Take lunch now, Tony.
Yeah, I always want to be the last presentation.
Okay, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. A review of tentatively scheduled items, please look those over. Be prepared for our next board meeting on the 25th.
Will we be doing, looking at the forecast water update?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Any other board comments? Staff comments? Thank you all very much. Good meeting. Meeting adjourned.
At 12:09 PM.